The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 276, Anger and Helplessness. Hogsmeade, the Little House. Snape walked into the room with a seemingly nonchalant air, yet no one knew the panic within him. Last night, or rather, before dawn, he had seen a childhood friend, though his jealousy had once disgusted him. However, after hearing Petunia's description, he knew things were more complicated than they seemed. Protected by the magic of sacrifice and love, no curse should be able to harm Harry easily. But those crimson eyes and that crazed expression. Snape immediately recalled the figure in his memory, and after writing his letter to Dumbledore, he hurried over. The blue ice room, the clear emerald eyes. For some reason, seeing Harry sitting alone, somewhat helpless and pitiful in the frozen little house, Snape felt a rising fire within him, an inexplicable rage. Looking around, Harry was the first person he ruled out. Then he saw the boy in the distance, drinking butterbeer. Though his expression of spectatorship was obvious, he was also one of his students. Finally, Snape's gaze locked with the old man across from him. I thought he would be safe. I was even foolish enough to believe those ridiculous things, that Hogwarts was the safest place, that someone was the greatest white wizard. He used to be very reserved with his words, but now he was speaking with a swift flow. Snape's transformation surprised Harry. Although he had heard stories about his parents on the train last year, he hadn't expected Snape's reaction. A cautious childhood had cultivated in Harry a keen sense of emotion, allowing him to discern who was kind to him and who truly disliked him. But it was precisely because of this that he felt Snape's reaction was a bit excessive. Not far away, Ino sipped his butterbeer. He noticed the change in Harry, but wasn't surprised. As the storyteller on the train last year, the one who had instigated the whole thing, he had only told Harry the stories of the previous generation's grievances, not the romances of the previous generation. After all, Snape wasn't the main character. Ino could sense the change in Harry, and the other two present also saw it clearly. Shut your ears. Snape waved his hand, casting a smooth, wandless spell that simultaneously blocked Harry's ears, preventing him from eavesdropping on the professor's speech. After doing this, Snape instinctively turned his head, aware of another student eavesdropping. Noticing the gaze, Ino put down his drink and self-consciously raised his hands to cover his ears, a gesture of, "You talk, I'm not eavesdropping." Seeing this, Snape abandoned the idea of continuing the spell. It wasn't a pretense of covering his ears, but rather that Ino had given him a different vibe after this meeting. Even just standing there gave him a subtle sense of pressure. And so, after Ino's ear-covering gesture, Snape followed suit, exposing the situation. Both sides had a way out. All of this was accomplished in a matter of seconds. Dumbledore paid no attention to the interaction between teacher and student. He needed to formulate his words and tell Snape the truth. He knew Snape, and he knew his former student. The other party's apparent anger was actually harmless and manageable. But Dumbledore wasn't sure if he could control his anger next. "Severus, there's something you might need to know. Although I hate to see this happen, it's happening." Understanding was always mutual. Dumbledore understood Snape, but Snape also understood Dumbledore. Hearing this tone and this expression, the anger on Snape's face vanished, replaced by a cautious look. This connects to the secret of why Tom can't be killed. From the Wu family orphanage over half a century ago, to the tragedy at Myrtle, and then the familiar job search for a defense against the dark arts professor. Dumbledore seemed to be hinting at something, recounting many details in detail. Of the four people present, only Harry seemed somewhat pitiful, sitting in the igloo, clearly seeing several people's mouths moving but unable to hear a single sound. Their hearing was blocked, but their vision was unaffected. Through the translucent ice, Harry could clearly see the shifting expressions of the others. Professor Dumbledore's guilt, Ino's pensiveness, Snape's utter indifference. The scene before him, having learned to read their expressions since childhood, made Harry feel inexplicably uncomfortable. He felt he wouldn't live much longer, as the expressions on their faces were obvious, especially Professor Dumbledore's, whose guilt tinged with a hint of helplessness. A typical Gryffindor feared no death, but Harry felt he hadn't lived enough, and his wonderful life had only just begun. If possible, he hoped to wait until graduation to die. Life in the castle had brought him so much joy, and the 11 years at Privet Drive couldn't compare to every minute and every second of Hogwarts. It seemed human nature always cherishes what is lost. At that moment, Harry felt like he'd wasted all that time, filled with regrets. He wanted to say goodbye to his friends, play another game of Quidditch with Ravenclaw's beautiful Seeker, even tell Professor McGonagall that he'd copied the Transfiguration assignments. As he thought about it, Harry felt as if dust had flown into his eyes, and a strange soreness settled over him. Then, a line of words suddenly appeared on the icy wall before him. Don't overthink it. Just two professors whispering, afraid the students might overhear. It was a joke, but Harry felt a surge of warmth. Someone in this room still cared about him. As the words on the icy wall vanished, Dumbledore finally spoke his final answer. Harry had unexpectedly become Voldemort's living Horcrux. Snape closed his eyes, no longer in a state of anger. A moment later, Snape opened them again, his gaze as calm as a pool of still water. Is there no way? A voice spoke with such indifference and emotionlessness that it seemed to cool the room. Seeing Snape in this state, Dumbledore sighed wearily. In reality, in his eyes, both Harry and Severus were the same, or rather, everyone was the same. I've only thought of one possibility. To prevent Snape from falling back into darkness, and to save Harry's life, Dumbledore expressed his inner thoughts. It seemed unreliable, but it was the only viable solution. The Horcrux is irreversible. From the moment it was created, Harry and Tom were bound together, their lives linked. There's only one way to break this connection, and it must be done by Tom himself. As Dumbledore spoke, Ino suddenly discovered a hidden detail in the original story. Perhaps, in the story of the Goblet of Fire, all the changes took place under the headmaster's nose, including Voldemort's resurrection. The only variable in the story might be Cedric. No one could have imagined that a Hufflepuff would suddenly possess the courage of a Gryffindor. Cedric's courage, Pettigrew's lightning-fast killing curse, this series of unexpected events led to irreversible tragedy. In the end, Dumbledore chose to leap from a tower, dying in the castle he loved so much. Whether this was a form of atonement is unknown, but one thing is certain, Dumbledore's feelings for Hogwarts, and for all the young wizards and witches who lived there, were perhaps no less profound than anyone else's. Chapter 277 The Inertia of Fate, Sacrifice and Atonement. Fate seemed to have returned to its original trajectory. Voldemort was likely to be resurrected. But unlike the near collapse in the original story, the current situation was like Quirrell in his first year, letting you perform to your heart's content while everyone silently cooperated. After Dumbledore finished explaining his plan, a crushing silence descended upon the hut. Snape didn't raise any foolish questions, whether the method was feasible or successful. He preferred to ask others, even the so-called greatest white wizard, only to receive unreliable answers. Compared to Dumbledore, Snape trusted his own judgment more. Beneath his seemingly calm face, he was meticulously calculating the feasibility of this plan. In the igloo, Harry surveyed the scene outside, curious as to why he had stopped mid-sentence. But his ears were blocked by magic, forcing him to look the other way. Elsewhere, Ino ignored Harry's pleading gaze, seeking a moment to share his own speculation and alternative plan. Seeing Snape's resigned expression, Ino slowly spoke. Professor. Actually, we have another solution. With just one sentence, both Snape and Dumbledore turned their heads in surprise. Why was Harry fine for the past 11 years, even in the first few years after entering Hogwarts, but something happened recently? Ino offered his theory, regarding the number of Horcruxes in Voldemort's control. Could it be that maintaining this number, and allowing Harry to master Occlumency as much as possible, and maintaining the current situation, is a good option? Rather than setting up a stage for a one-on-one confrontation between Voldemort and Harry, maintaining the status quo is conservative, but at least it's safer. After expressing his thoughts, Ino observed the expressions of Dumbledore and Snape. However, their expressions were curious, even somewhat surprising. Dumbledore seemed moved, but Snape frowned, as if he didn't approve of the proposal. You don't understand his evil. If my prediction is wrong, Harry won't have a chance of survival, Snape reasoned. Deep down, he had another thought. It was clear that Dumbledore would not ignore you-know-who after his resurrection. Similarly, the resurrected you-know-who would only target Dumbledore. The best approach was to let the two fight for a few more decades. That was the safest and most conservative approach. With those few decades, he was confident he could develop a potion to suppress Horcruxes. After all, Wolfsbane, which had plagued wizards for millennia and even Merlin couldn't solve, could be easily controlled by a potion. His advanced occlumency technique obscured Snape's inner thoughts. Even Dumbledore, standing right next to him, was oblivious. Dumbledore couldn't detect it, and Ino couldn't see anything either, simply interpreting it as Snape's concern for Harry. Seeing that Snape disapproved of the second option, Dumbledore temporarily dismissed it. Whichever method is used, occlumency is crucial and most urgent. Sev, this requires your cooperation with Ino. Let Harry master occlumency as soon as possible. As if sensing his end, Dumbledore lifted the spell that blocked his ears. After the spell was lifted, Harry didn't ask any urgent questions, remaining calm and composed in the igloo. From a third-person perspective, Ino observed the composed Harry, then glanced across at Dumbledore and Snape. Suddenly, it struck him that a boy's growth might truly be a fleeting moment. Harry seemed to have acquired a touch of the demeanor of a decisive battle. Inside the room, just as everyone had reached a consensus. Bang! Bang! A sudden, harsh knock on the door echoed. The sound brought a flicker of displeasure to Ino's eyes. Since he'd bought the cottage, no one had ever been so rude, as if they were about to force their way in. His changing emotions caused the shadow beneath his feet to stir, and a faint puff of smoke drifted gently along the floor toward the door. Hurry, open the door. I know you're in there. What happened to Harry? Outside, Sirius, receiving no response, began to shout. He had been sitting peacefully at home, but the news from the Ministry of Magic struck him as absurd. Harry had blatantly attacked his uncle with magic and was even taken away by Ministry staff. If the messenger hadn't been a distant relative of the Black family, he would have thought it was an April Fool's joke. But by the time he arrived at the Ministry, he was still too late. Harry had already been taken away by Dumbledore. His pure-blood heritage was evident at this moment. Using the Accident and Disaster Department, Sirius tracked Harry down to Hogsmeade. Meanwhile, despite the persistent knocks on the door, Sirius felt a sudden chill on his neck. He looked up. It was a sunny day, but he felt like he was in Azkaban. In the room, the shadows shifted. That knock reminds me of Hagrid. Dumbledore smiled, standing up and rushing towards the door. With his steps, the faint puff of smoke on the floor dissipated. Seeing this, Ino turned decisively and headed upstairs. Now that they had reached a consensus, there was no need to stay to watch the tender, loving father-son drama. It seemed he wasn't the only one with this thought. Snape sneered and also stood up, heading towards the fireplace. His expression and demeanor betrayed an attempt to avoid any contact with a rabid dog. In the igloo, the slight smile that had crept onto Harry's face at Sirius's voice faded as the two men left the room. Turning his head, he sighed silently. Soon, a smile returned to Harry's face. Second floor bedroom. Ino half slept on his bed, agitated by the commotion downstairs. Barking dogs. He grumbled, then disappeared from the room. Sanctuary Valley. Tranquility and tranquility are the eternal themes here. The vibrant valley is ablaze with a variety of beautiful and interesting flowers, gray rice buds, lively bouncing bulbs, pink umbrella flowers, sparkling bubble pods. All of this is the result of the hard work of the trolls and goblins. Before entering Middle-earth, he dropped seeds of various magical plants and gave these two hard-working individuals the order to plant them. 10 years in the making. Now, over 100 acres of the valley has been transformed into a beautiful herb garden. Given the speed of time, nothing is more profitable than growing herbs. Seeds purchased just this summer, after a trip to Middle-earth, have sprouted many magical herbs that are 10 years old. Chapter 278 Valley Herb Plantation, Strange Flowers. In the valley, Ino surveyed the scenery with satisfaction. But soon, he spotted something different in the distance. In a clearing beyond the magical plants, a host of unusual, even bizarre, plants suddenly sprouted. Without delay, Ino swiftly made his way to the other side of the valley. As they drew closer, he felt as if he were witnessing a true fairy tale garden. The plants here were no longer traditionally green, they were the fruit of children's endless imagination and creativity. It was as if he had stepped into a magical land, greeted by leaves gleaming with brilliant luster. But upon closer inspection, they seemed as if cut from colorful candy wrappers. Just approaching them, an alluring sweetness emanated, the scent of candy. And amidst these candy-wrapped leaves lay buds as pure as crystal balls, flawless and translucent. Just one glance captivated him. These colorful, glassy flowers truly resembled magical flowers from a fairy tale, imbued with the mystery and fantasy. Perhaps sensing the attention, the flowers seemed to have a sense of consciousness, gently swaying their delicate branches as if in greeting. He moved gently. In the center of these dreamy blossoms stood a 5-foot-tall, vibrant red tulip. Ino had noticed this striking symbol long before. A few minutes later, as he approached the tulip, a warm and comfortable feeling washed over him. Nearly 5 feet tall, the tulip's slender stem stood gracefully, like a graceful dancer, displaying beauty in a unique way. Its silky leaves were smooth and textured. Gradually shifting upward, Ino saw the bud proudly standing at the top of the tulip. Vivid as a ruby, it brimmed with passion and vitality, and yet, still unopened, it possessed a raw, unpolished beauty. Creation and passion, pure as flame. Ino quietly gazed at the red tulip. This flower gave him a different feeling. So different that even standing close to it, he felt the urge to sing softly. Half an hour later. A thick piece of linen cloth was held in the hand of the ice giant, while a timid goblin hid behind it. "It's not your fault." Ino waved his hand, dismissing the comedic duo of Tom and Jerry. The moment he saw the linen cloth, he knew the origin of the dream garden. The cloth had been used to wrap the stones collected by the children in Rohan. Respecting the children's hard work, he hadn't discarded it, but had placed it in the humble hut. When he left, so as not to disappoint the children, he had packed it into a traceless, extended suitcase. However, he had never imagined that such an unintentional act would bring such unexpected rewards. Whether it was the colorful candy wrapper leaves or the pure crystal flowers, he could easily understand them. But the vibrant red tulip left him with a doubt. It couldn't possibly have been made by children. Although this judgment was groundless, simply a feeling, it lingered in his heart, like a dream. "I can't figure it out." Ino raised his hand and rubbed his brow, then waved his wand. In the valley, a 2-story house, white as marble, had its windows flung open as if by an invisible hand. From within, a regal diadem inlaid with sapphires flew out, the diadem of Ravenclaw. The diadem gently landed on his head, bringing with it a refreshing coolness. In this coolness, useless thoughts drifted away like dandelions, swept away by a gentle breeze. Middle-earth, Rohan, the capital, the little house, all known information was now precisely connected. Scenes from the past flashed by, and soon, the picture froze. In the picture, an elderly man in a white robe appeared in the little house. On the morning before he set up his stall, Gandalf unexpectedly visited. Unlike the peaceful days of the valley, Hogsmeade, Sirius was now a little irritated. In just half a semester, everything had become unfamiliar to him. Everything had been fine during last Christmas break. Halfway through the summer, Harry felt like he was in prison, confined to this tiny cage of ice. Even more outrageous, Harry had to live with that snotty little jerk for the rest of his life. Professor Dumbledore, is this really unchangeable? I can find Harry the best teacher for Occlumency, no matter the price. Sirius made his final, unyielding plea. That's enough, Sirius, Dumbledore interrupted. He had heard this sort of thing at least 5 times. I asked Severus for help because I haven't met anyone in all of Europe who's more proficient in Occlumency than him. But Sirius opened his mouth, but no words of rebuttal came out. Dumbledore had said it, so what else could he do? He couldn't just hire a charlatan to teach Harry. It's okay, Sirius, Harry said, fittingly offering comfort. Professor Snape is fine, and there's Ino, he'll come and keep me company sometimes. Seeing no objections from either party, Sirius sighed again. If that snotty jerk dares to bully you, tell me when you get back, and I'll hang him myself. Harry nodded slightly at this reassurance, but offered no verbal response. As a victim of the latest generation of hanging, Harry knew the feeling of being strung upside down in public. At Lockhart's dueling club, he and Ron were strung up by Malfoy, and the humiliation nearly overwhelmed him. Countless people pointed and criticized him. And that was only half the problem. Ron bore the other half, after all, and most importantly, they were both wearing pants at the time. Therefore, thinking of Snape's experience filled Harry with a deep sense of guilt. Being hung in the hallway in front of the girl he liked, even wearing only his robes. Putting himself in Harry's shoes, he felt that if he were humiliated like this, he would probably fight to the death. Time slipped by quietly. Before noon, Ino left the valley and returned to his bedroom on the 2nd floor. It was quiet downstairs now, presumably because the others had left. This made him feel at ease, and he also marveled at the generosity of Middle-earth. After donning the Ravenclaw diadem, he thought for a while and understood what the Red Tulip had conceived. A few acts of kindness, a simple song, and a collection of stories earned him one of the 3 rings of elves, Naya, the Ring of Fire. This generosity was truly unexpected. It's the end of the month. Zyodi is begging for votes. Also, I have a meeting today, the weekend, so Zyodi won't have time to share information about fantastic beasts. The update is late. Sorry. Chapter 279 Snape's Potions Room. In the bustling city of London, there are always some special places hidden away. So special that they're often forgotten by the gentlemen of Downing Street. These forgotten places become synonymous with old age and dinginess. 19 Spinner's End. Inside a small, tan wooden building, Harry quietly surveyed the interior. The layout seemed to be from the previous century: old furniture, yellowed newspapers, dusty photographs, and the kind of pendulum clock you'd only find in antique shops. The first floor living room. As Harry surveyed his surroundings, Snape's eye slipped past Harry's. In a split second, he felt a surge of thoughts, like mushrooms after rain. His biggest dream had once been to invite another girl with the same emerald green eyes to visit him. Sadly, for various reasons, that invitation never materialized. As Snape paused, Harry sighed. Ever since entering Hogwarts and finishing his first potions class, he had never imagined he'd ever be able to visit Snape's home. And this wasn't just a simple visit, they were supposed to stay here for 2 weeks. As Harry thought about this, Professor Dumbledore's instructions flashed through his mind. In 2 weeks, regardless of whether they learned the subject or not, they had to return to Aunt Petunia's house on Privet Drive and stay there until the start of school. As the two of them paused in silence, a flicker of green flame lit up the fireplace. "Sorry. I'm late," Ino said, his eyes quickly scanning the living room. Unlike Snape's composure, Harry stood up and greeted him with a smile. "How can I be late without an agreed time?" "That's possible, since you were all waiting for me." Ino glanced around again. While the place was a bit dated, the overall space was ample. But what puzzled him was that Snape wouldn't let Harry sleep in the first-floor living room. "Come with me." Snape stood up and headed for the stairs leading to the second floor. The wooden stairs creaked softly underfoot, and the group, following Snape, soon reached their room on the second floor. The moment they pushed open the door, Ino admitted he'd underestimated his headmaster. It was apparently just a room similar to the one downstairs, yet it was actually more than 10 times larger. The untraceable extension charm was a truly impressive feat, perhaps a testament to the potions master's confidence, as he simply disregarded ministry regulations. The room was a dazzling display of various bottles and jars, brass cauldrons, and piles of pristine glass bottles. Of course, there were also various potion ingredients, including countless herbs and roots, magical animal entrails, and even a few specimens he couldn't name. This was clearly where Snape brewed his potions daily. "Professor, are you letting Harry live here?" Ino asked uncertainly. While the room looked much more spacious than downstairs, the smell of so many potion ingredients piled together was unimaginable. Harry, though silent, glanced at Snape with a puzzled expression. "It's highly secure here," Snape offered a rare explanation. "Well, you're right," Ino shrugged nonchalantly. In such matters, where one lived didn't really matter when it came to safety. Besides, the place where Snape brewed potions and stored ingredients was presumably safe. As Harry watched in amazement, a shimmering crystal house slowly rose from the second-floor room, resembling a small square. The small house wasn't large, appearing to be only a dozen square meters, but its shape and color reminded him of the mushroom houses in his childhood fairy tales. Unlike Harry, who was simply observing the excitement, Snape narrowed his eyes and examined the small room before him. Silently and wandless, elemental transfiguration magic, and an entire house conjured up at once. The combination of all this made Snape feel a sense of absurdity. The student who had once pretended to be mature had grown so much in just 3 years. "Harry, your new house is ready. It's a real treat." Ino half-jokingly pointed at the mushroom house. "If you're cold, you can light the fireplace inside to keep warm. My ice won't melt easily, you can be assured of that." The igloo, or rather the insulation provided by the ice, was essentially just to allow Harry to get a good night's sleep. Especially when Harry mentioned dreaming of turning into a snake, the unconscious connection between the Horcrux and the main soul might have been the key factor gradually being affected. Dumbledore understood this, and Ino had guessed it as well. Because of this, He also felt that Harry could be quite stubborn at times. If he had spoken up sooner, the first time he had a headache or a dream, things might have been much better. But now that things had come to this, there was no point in pursuing blame. In a small square filled with potions and herbs, a semicircular mushroom house, approximately 5 or 6 meters in diameter and 3 meters high, stood in the middle. Pushing open the small rolling door, Harry felt a chill, especially in his summer short-sleeved shirt. Flame. Noticing Harry's discomfort, Ino snapped his fingers, and a floating flame rose from the icy mushroom house. As the flames appeared, the temperature in the room immediately rose significantly. The display of ice and fire, perhaps only magic could allow their perfect coexistence. If you need any more furniture, just use transfiguration to make it yourself. After all, you're not staying here permanently, so just making do is enough. Ino pulled a bag of BB's every flavor beans from his pocket and handed it to Harry, then walked out of the mushroom house. Inside, Harry looked down at the candy in his hand. He knew the purpose of the BB's every flavor beans. But, using small candies to transform into furniture? For a moment, Harry wanted to call Ino and seriously tell him that he had copied all his transfiguration homework, and copied without thinking. Leaving the mushroom house, Ino came to Snape's side. "Professor, I've done everything I could. If you need anything else, feel free to write to me." "Okay." Snape nodded slightly, then pulled a bottle of dazzling potion from his pocket. The golden color of Felix Felicis was unique among all potions. Seeing the familiar potion, Ino couldn't help but feel dazed. There was a time when he was also obsessed with Felix Felicis, even going to the potions office every week to deal with herbs, hoping that one day he would be able to brew this magical potion himself. However, after the start of his 3rd year, with a Ravenclaw item and the Ancient Runes elective, his pursuit of potions seemed to have been shelved. Now, seeing his former pursuit again, he felt a sense of change. "Professor, I don't need the Felicis Felix for now." Looking at the cherished potion, Ino shook his head and refused. While the item was good, he had no reason to accept it, as it had never been Snape's turn to pay for it. Although his potion was rejected, Snape seemed to remember something else, and a smile suddenly flashed across his calm face. Chapter 280 Time flies, England in August. Time slipped through his fingers like fine sand, silent and yet unwavering. Hogsmeade. On the 2nd floor of the cottage, Ino was intently sorting the letters on his desk. More than half a month had slipped by since his last trip to Spinner's End. Time flew by, and much had happened during that time, some of which he was deeply concerned with, while others he could do nothing about. Harry, for example, did everything he could, out of respect for Snape and Dumbledore. Whether Harry could master Occlumency, and what his future held, was Harry's own fate. Sometimes, the world seemed like a vast collection of stories, and whether it was Harry or anyone else, everyone was the protagonist of their own story. In the 2nd floor study, all the letters on the desk were now divided into 2 categories, completed and to-do. They looked more like to-do lists than letters. Ino suddenly realized that with the passage of time and his age, the tranquility he once enjoyed seemed to be gone, and the trivialities of life were gradually increasing. This summer, in particular, had been filled with numerous tedious tasks, one after another, such as recording for law, production of the cinescope for Bridguni Island, the letter of receipt for the Merlin Band, and so on. From the pile of letters, he had only picked out the letter of receipt for the Merlin Band and set it aside. In the past 2 weeks, many things had quietly changed. Ino glanced across his desk, sorting through all the letters. It was clear that the tasks that had once seemed tedious had been completed one by one. Whether it was the Quidditch World Cup performance or the production of the cinescope, everything was on track. Especially regarding the Quidditch World Cup. A week ago, he had recorded 3 different theme songs at law, and he had handed over the details of the follow-up to Old Flint to negotiate with the Ministry of Magic. Looking at the only unfinished letter on the desk, Ino stood up and stretched out his arms in a relaxed manner. This feeling of being free and unburdened is truly refreshing. It's a world away from the comfort of the cottage. In early August, a subtle tension and anticipation permeated the air across England. With the countdown to the Quidditch World Cup drawing to a close, the Ministry of Magic was operating at full capacity. The Disasters and Incidents Department, the Law Enforcement Department, the Sports and Sport Department, the International Cooperation Department. With the exception of the Department of Mysteries, There wasn't a single idle person in the vast ministry. It couldn't be helped, after all, the influx of foreign wizards into England now outnumbered the native wizards. Faced with such a serious event, at Fudge's behest, the ministry contacted the Muggle Prime Minister. In Manchester, London, Mr. Granger sat in front of the television, watching the morning news. The anchor solemnly reported the latest news, mentioning the recent arrival of a major circus in England and the gathering of renowned magicians from around the world. In the past, he would have watched with fascination, offering his thoughts. But now, everything was different. Hermione, do you want me to pack camping gear in advance? A high-powered flashlight or a generator? You know your mother and I can't cook with magic, Mr. Granger asked expectantly. Sporting events had always been his favorite. This year, work commitments prevented him from traveling to the United States to watch the World Cup, but by some unexpected turn of events, his daughter had managed to get tickets to the Wizarding World Cup. While she didn't know much about Quidditch, she knew it was a very exciting sport, given its continued popularity in the Wizarding world. Meanwhile, Hermione put down her newspaper after hearing her father's question. Dad, we don't need to bring anything. I'll take care of everything. If you absolutely have to bring anything, we can bring the small tent we had last summer. Okay. A flicker of disappointment crossed Mr. Granger's eyes when he realized he couldn't help. Once, this family depended on him for everything. But now, he couldn't help at all, not even with money, as the Wizarding Bank had restricted its exchange rate for British pounds. Unlike Hermione, Mrs. Granger, sensing the change in her husband's tone, took the initiative and shook his hand. You should be happy, not sad. Hermione has her own life, you can't expect to take care of her all her life, and she will find someone who will really take care of her. Mrs. Granger turned her gaze to the newspaper in Hermione's hand. She had seen the photo on the front page of the newspaper. At the same time, in the Three Broomsticks pub in Hogsmeade, the laughter here has not stopped since the afternoon. In the spacious hall, there is a large 41-inch video mirror hanging, which plays the funny stories of Tom and Jerry in a loop. The little wizards in the castle may be a little tired of seeing them, but adult wizards are the mainstream of Hogsmeade, and there are also many foreign tourists. Different from the laughter and liveliness of others. As the bar owner, Ms. Rosmerta cares more about the sales of alcohol. She first glanced at today's sales, then turned to the young man beside her and sighed, I don't know how you came up with this idea. This thing is bound to become mainstream in the future. You'll be truly wealthy in the future. Hearing the familiar teasing, Ino took the lead. It doesn't have much to do with me. It's mainly because we have a lot of partners, so everything is going smoothly. But I don't know if it will be so smooth outside of England in the future. You're worrying too much? Madame Rosmerta shook her head gently. You have no idea of their strength. With enough profit, even if they encounter trouble, they won't be afraid. Maybe. I don't know what's going on with old Tom. Looking at the crowded Three Broomsticks, Ino became curious about the situation in Diagon Alley. With the Shadowbriony Island alchemy factory running smoothly, the first batch of promotional products quietly entered the market. Thanks to the joint efforts of local pure-blood wizards, every shop in Diagon Alley and Hogsmeade now hangs a video mirror that plays animation according to the store's size. His place will only be more popular than mine. Lady Rosmerta casually responded, then changed the subject. As for you, it's hard to believe Fudge would agree to add a new segment before the World Cup. A stage with 100,000 people. Merlin. Fudge would agree simply because it's more than just a performance. If all goes well, many things will be rewritten. Ino knew that, unlike the unusual Fid, if a proper phoenix was born in front of 100,000 witnesses, Fudge's name would also be etched in history. After all, this was a first in England. A bit stuck. Sorry everyone, there are only 2 pictures today. Zia Odie will sort them out tonight. Tomorrow is the World Cup, and then we'll speed up the school term and head into the Triwizard Tournament. Zia Odie's sharing, Flobberworm. British Ministry of Magic Classification, X appearance, Flobberworms are thick, round, brown, worm-like creatures that can reach 10 inches in length and are not very active. The flobberworm's body has 2 distinct ends, each capable of chewing plants and secreting mucus, hence its name. Habits: the flobberworm lives in damp ditches. Its preferred food is lettuce, but it will eat nearly any plant. Chapter 281 Interesting Camp. Ino was leisurely sipping herbal juice at the bar. Far away in Diagon Alley, the leaky cauldron was abuzz with activity. As the face of Diagon Alley, the leaky cauldron offered a diverse audience, a variety of skin colors, races, and attire. It was as if wizards from all over the world had flocked in. And that was just a small fraction. It was a fact of life. Some chose to travel to England in advance, while others opted to teleport at the last minute using a portkey. But whatever the choice, one thing remained unaffected: wizards' love for Quidditch. As time progressed, and August arrived, the weather grew increasingly hot, even bringing the occasional heavy downpour. A brief downpour, lasting less than a quarter of an hour, not only failed to cool the air, but instead created an extremely humid and oppressive atmosphere. Of course, this all refers to densely populated areas like London and Diagon Alley. Under the moonlit sky, a cool evening breeze drifted across the untouched wilderness of St. Catchpole. Knee-high green grass swayed in the breeze, resembling rolling waves. Amidst this tranquil landscape, a crooked house stood out. Warm lights flickered from its irregular windows, seemingly echoing the twinkling stars in the sky. The Weasley family's burrow. I can't believe Bulgaria made it to the finals. Arthur sighed again, though he couldn't recall how many times he had broached the subject. My dear, if you have time to chat, why don't you go to the ministry and help keep an eye on things? Percy hasn't been home for 3 days. Hearing her husband bring up Quidditch again, Mrs. Weasley glanced worriedly at the clock at the burrow, the hands still firmly pointed to work. It's okay. I'm relieved Percy's with old Barty. Besides, they'll be bearing the brunt of the World Cup. Arthur dismissed his wife's concerns. He could understand the young man's dedication to his career. Perhaps you're right, buddy. Well, Mrs. Weasley trailed off with a sigh that seemed to encompass everything. She wanted her children to follow the right path and become excellent, but she also didn't want them to overwork themselves. It was already night, and she didn't even know if Percy had eaten dinner on time. Diagon Alley. In a shop closed for proofing. Percy held a crystal-clear wineglass, surrounded by many well-dressed young wizards. It was obvious that a small dinner party was being held. Now that everything is settled, I'll be leaving. Enjoy yourselves. Draco set down his glass in the crowd and slowly stood up. Oh, don't spoil the fun like that. My Master Malfoy. Marcus said jokingly. A small joke brought a hint of amusement to the faces of those around him. Not to spoil the fun, but it's time for me to go home. Draco's eyes flickered, his long platinum hair gleaming in the light. I've delivered on my responsibilities. The shop, the venue, and the initial capital investment, now it's up to you. His slow speech and composed expression reminded many of Malfoy Sr. However, the Malfoy Sr. wasn't Lucius, but Lucius's father, a helmsman admired by many. At the same time, a slightly hoarse female voice echoed from the crowd. In that case, I can go back now. In a few days, you'll see the changes to Nocturne Alley. The speaker was Mina Burke, former Slytherin head girl and now a 2-year graduate. While smugglers might think of Abbott and ones of Ollivanders, the mention of Nocturne Alley always brings Burke to mind. You guys are really... Marcus was speechless. These two were simply bizarre, leaving right after finishing their business. Percy was equally speechless. It wasn't that he felt there was anything wrong with the two leaving, but rather that something was truly unfair. Although they were both members of the Sacred 28, the Wheel Eyes truly had nothing. But it didn't matter. The Wheel Eyes would change. Percy had more faith in this than ever before, especially after George and Fred took charge of the post-production improvements to the Vision Scope. If the Vision Scope were a sailing ship, George and Fred would undoubtedly be the most prominent members of the ship. He, on the other hand, was the spokesperson for his two younger brothers and the Weasley family, responsible for socializing and networking. After all, some things had to be earned. Thinking of this, Percy raised his glass again, a familiar smile spreading across his face. Time is always fair. It won't slow down due to any external factors. Within a week, thanks to the Ministry of Magic's tireless efforts, the entire venue, capable of accommodating 100,000 people, was complete. Although the tournament was still a few days away, many wizards had already settled in the vicinity. From Fudge to the ministry interns, everyone agreed with this idea. Finally, they could gather together, freeing them from the daily fear of a wizard going haywire and causing a major uproar in the Muggle world. Therefore, outside the Quidditch Stadium, the Ministry of Magic deployed a massive Muggle repelling charm, its coverage incredibly wide, ensuring that no Muggles could be seen for dozens of miles. Thousands of tents were stationed across the vast plain, a sea of endless colorful strips and boisterous crowds. While most of the tents were identical, some, like hyacinths blooming in a rose garden, displayed their own unique style. Chimneys, windmills, sleds, and even small fountains atop their tents were added. The variety of whimsical decorations was endless. Ino, amidst the bustling camp, felt a sense of familiarity in this medieval marketplace. The vendors pushing carts were especially numerous, like the candy carts on the Hogwarts Express, only more numerous and richer in goods. Pies, chocolates, souvenirs, telescopes, Irish shamrock badges, miniature Quidditch figures. In short, each cart was a magical blind box, as you had no idea where the vendor was from, let alone what was inside. In just a few minutes, Ino had spotted several unusual vendors, a burly white man pushing a cart of vodka, a black woman with a cart draped with bone ornaments. The vast camp was filled with lively and interesting scenes. But what struck him most was the unexpected fact that so many people were filming with video cameras. Chapter 282 Pure Blood Under the Trend of Interest. In the camp, after chatting with a French girl with a thick accent, Ino finally learned the latest news about the cinemascope. Draco and Marcus, or rather, Malfoy and Flint, along with numerous pure-blood families, had joined forces to quietly release a large number of ready-made cinemascopes onto the market, using a half-price, half-gift model. It was like the French girl who, after purchasing some love potions from Extraordinary Potions, was told she'd won a prize. She paid 10 sickles and, unbeknownst to her, received a 15-inch cinemascope, said to be capable of continuous filming for over 3 hours, with a promise of at least 10 years of preservation. Honestly, Ino's initial reaction was speechless. Giving photography equipment to a girl who had purchased a love potion, it was simply outrageous. While absurd, it also demonstrated the executional prowess of the local purebloods. After the Malfoy Manor banquet, Ino completely ceded control, declaring that all developments on Brajuni Island would be governed by the decisions of the shareholders' meeting. And so far, far from disappointing, the current developments had even yielded unexpected surprises. A limited-time photoshoot, this is pure marketing savvy. They've literally turned a reusable item into a disposable one. Time slipped by unnoticed. 3 days flew by. During this time, Ino truly felt the allure of magic. Wizards from around the world gathered, offering a myriad of magical experiences far beyond anything Hogwarts or Diagon Alley could offer. For a moment, he even considered buying an island and transforming it into an amusement park for wizards everywhere. However, all this was still in the planning stages. The most pressing priority was getting the opening concert ready. As the time approached, Old Flint delivered a reply from the Ministry of Magic, revealing the song chosen, The Cup of Life, the theme song for the next 98 years. This choice came as no surprise to Ino. There are many theme songs for the Muggle World Cup, but the passionate A Cup of Life is undoubtedly at the top. It's a song tailor-made for the sport, devoid of extravagant spending or fame and fortune, simply pure passion and revelry. Likewise, Old Flint not only brought a letter from the Ministry of Magic, but also 10 sets of exquisite evening gowns in various styles. As time went on, the camp's population continued to swell. Impressive! Sirius exclaimed heartily, surveying the vast expanse of the camp. Beside him stood Harry and the Wheeleyes. Yes, Fudge has his moments, Arthur continued, his tone equally proud. This was more than just a bit of skill, it was like building a city in the wilderness. As a true Englishman, Arthur was truly impressed. When I got the tickets from Ludo, I heard that the ministry had sold about 100,000 tickets. Now it seems it's probably more than 100,000. 100,000. At this moment, Harry and all the Weasley children were speechless with astonishment at the number. Harry, in particular, had once naively believed that the bustling Diagon Alley and the bustling Hogwarts were the epicenter of the wizarding world. Arthur seemed to notice a change in Harry. Children, the wizarding world isn't just Hogwarts. The world outside is vast. But our first priority is setting up the tent. If nothing goes wrong, we'll be spending the next few days here. Arthur clapped his hands and looked up at the sky. They had set out from Stoat Hill that morning, and the sun was already approaching noon. No need to bother with a tent. Sirius stopped them from busying around. They allocated me the territory a week ago, and I had Creature set up the tent. It's big enough for all of us. Seeing he couldn't start, Arthur felt a little frustrated. Okay. I'll do as you say. With their minds agreed, everyone followed Sirius back on the road. After all, As an ancient pure-blood family, the Blacks obviously wouldn't set up their tent in such an ordinary area. In fact, it wasn't just the Blacks. Many prominent individuals had their tents set up in the area closest to the competition venue. About half an hour later, everyone followed Sirius to a luxurious, central location. The reason for this was the stark contrast between the style and design of the area they had previously visited. Unlike the slum-like, triangular tents on the outermost level, what was set up here was more like a luxurious miniature palace than a tent. The most intuitive concept was the 4-story, luxurious miniature castle not far away. Gardens, a sundial, fountains, towers, and everything in between were present. Even more impressive, even for a temporary camp, they even kept several white peacocks in the garden for viewing. This sense of luxury, while unsurprising to Sirius, made everyone present, including Harry, feel a subtle sense of unease. George and Fred, however, remained unfazed by the extravagance, even feeling a strange sense of confidence. At the same time, inside the spacious, palace-like tent, Ino lounged comfortably on the plush sofa. After lunch, a short nap was the perfect option. "Aren't you nervous?" Unlike the others, who were still in the dark, Draco had long known the details of the evening's match. "What's there to be nervous about?" On the sofa, Ino opened his eyes slightly and whispered, "Don't be fooled by the crowds. In reality, the only person you have to face is yourself. Only yourself." Draco repeated thoughtfully. "Yes. That's what my teacher told me. Those who can face themselves with ease can always face everyone else with ease. Even under the gaze of the whole world, they can remain calm and composed." As he spoke, Ino couldn't help but think back to the past. In that fantasy world, the Royal Theatre was just as grand as it is now, perhaps even more so. Ignoring Draco's deep thoughts, Ino closed his eyes again. The story had been altered beyond recognition, but he had no regrets. No matter how it changed, it was just a change of protagonists. He had been afraid of change because he felt insecure, but now, if Harry really couldn't carry the load, he wouldn't mind playing a cameo role. After all, this was just a story set in a small corner of the British Isles. As Ino drifted off to sleep, Draco seemed to have figured something out. A glint of light suddenly flashed in his eyes, then vanished in an instant. But in those few seconds, Draco looked even more composed. With his well-tailored tuxedo, from a distance, he looked nothing like a fourth-year student. Chapter 283 The 422nd Quidditch. Time slipped by. As the afternoon wore on, a sense of excitement quietly spread throughout the camp. At dusk, even the silent sunset seemed to tremble with anticipation. Amidst this intense emotion, Ino slowly opened his eyes, and before him floated a tiny flame, resembling the burning of a match. He felt the shifting flames, and then vanished from the spot where he stood. Backstage. Unlike the charlatan opening betting in the original story, Ludo Bagman, director of the Department of Magical Games and Sports, was now on edge. The audience was about to enter, and the main character of the opening had yet to show up. He knew that if this went wrong, he wouldn't know if the other party was safe, but his tenure as director would likely be over. He would bring disgrace to the entire Ministry of Magic in England, and even if he managed to keep his position, his future would be fraught with uncertainty. Then, a soft sound echoed through the air. Ludo turned around, and upon seeing this, tears welled up in his eyes. "Thank God. You haven't forgotten. You haven't shown up, and I was scared to death. Sorry, I overslept." Ino explained softly. "These are just small things." "Small things," Ludo said with lingering fear. God knows how he could have fallen asleep. "We have 1 hour to prepare. At that time, the venue staff will play the background music simultaneously in the 12 areas according to your signal. Remember, the red fireworks spell, they only recognize this." Ludo repeated the previously agreed upon agreement. Ino nodded silently and then walked to the workroom to the side. Since it was a performance, he had to change clothes. At the same time, Ludo's expression suddenly relaxed. Everything seemed to be going smoothly so far. He also needed to prepare for his work. An hour later. The stage, which could accommodate a full 100,000 people, was completely packed. On the top floor, in the private room in the center, Ludo stood up and looked at Fudge. At Fudge's smile and nod, he slowly began, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Welcome to the 422nd Quidditch World Cup." As Ludo finished speaking, thunderous applause erupted from the arena. "All right. But before the game, we've got a little surprise for you all. We hope you enjoy it. Technically speaking, Ludo wasn't a very good host. His opening had presented a significant challenge to Ino, like a 30-second commercial before a TV show. No one would enjoy it. While no one had complained yet, the atmosphere in the 100,000-seat stadium was noticeably strained. Fudge's brows furrowed, his gaze piercing at Ludo. He now regretted letting this idiot open the show. Seeing his minister's expression, Ludo belatedly realized the problem. Logically, after his speech, the mascots were supposed to take the stage. A cold reception wouldn't matter. After all, mascots were supposed to warm up the crowd. But now, after glancing around, Ludo lowered his head guiltily. Just as the situation was about to spiral out of control, a deep, melodious sound echoed, resonating throughout the stadium. The roar of the waves echoed alongside it. Look up at the sky. Merlin's beard. As the first person noticed, more and more people looked up. Suddenly, a 30-foot-long whale, shimmering with light, appeared in the pitch-black night sky. The night was like an ocean, and as the silver whale swam, its moans echoed, accompanied by the faint sound of waves. In this scene, everyone felt a sense of depth and vastness, as if they were on a boundless ocean. Wizards are sensitive and empathetic. For a few brief seconds, accompanied by the melodious sound of waves, the entire Quidditch pitch felt as if it had experienced a wave, and the restlessness within gradually subsided. Silence fell. Horizontal ellipsis. Then, under everyone's gaze, the whale in the sky slowly swam downward, until it was 60 feet above the ground. At this point, the sound of waves and whale calls faded silently. Though the sounds faded, everyone's eyes were fixed on the whale, or rather, on the young man perched on its back. Against the backdrop of the starry night, beneath the soaring silver whale, a dazzling spectacle, even within the enchanting world of magic, the scene captivated everyone present. Seeing the shift in the atmosphere, Ino slowly breathed a sigh of relief. He had been so badly tricked by Ludo that he had been forced to change his entrance after he finished his opening speech. The clever combination of the silver patronus and the soaring boggart barely held the fort. Despite his apprehension, he didn't miss this hard-earned opportunity. As everyone watched, he slowly waved his wand. Suddenly, two silver clouds, one large and one small, appeared in the sky. In a moment, they transformed into figures on broomsticks. Although their faces couldn't be seen clearly, their builds made them clearly resemble both an adult and a child. Child, I'm already very old, and there's not much I can teach you. But in this brief journey of life, I've raced against the wind countless times, and walked shoulder to shoulder with the clouds. What I pursued wasn't just the golden snitch, but the unquenchable fire of struggle within me. But isn't the game all about chasing the golden snitch? Ino's voice, alternating between old and young, began with a play's opening, a gesture designed to elicit emotional response. Yes, the game is about chasing the golden snitch. But Quidditch isn't. Then what is Quidditch? It's the wizarding spirit of never giving up, never compromising. Whenever wizards face misfortune and setbacks, they remember Quidditch, the struggles they once fought on the field. These few words rekindled everyone's passion for Quidditch. Why did they love it? It wasn't the high prize money or the so-called prestige, but the inherent unwillingness to compromise. With a spirit, ancient wizards defeated dragons, expelled giants, and quelled goblin rebellions, even forcing Dementors to huddle in Azkaban. Just like Lord Cadogan of Gryffindor, who, without a wand or a melting sword, charged towards the wyvern. While seemingly foolish, it ultimately reflects the wizard's inherent tenacity and fighting spirit. Wizards will spare no effort in striving for their ideals. As the conversation ended, the silver mist in the sky vanished. In its place, another scene, a clear image, emerged. It depicted countless wizards in distant times, facing dangers like dragons, giants, dementors, and venomous cats. Regardless of the foe, wizards clutched their wands, choosing to fight and resist. Then, abruptly, the images vanished. Blazing. As a cluster of red fireworks, a symbol of hope, appeared, the stadium rang with rhythmic music. Across this rhythmic music, a voice filled the stadium. The cup of life is the one. Here we go. Allies, allies, allies. Go, go, go. The song of the future Muggles began playing in England 4 years early. No matter what people were thinking or discussing before, at this moment, Quidditch was the only thing on many people's minds. The distinctive rhythm and simple, Accessible lyrics filled everyone with passion and a desire for victory, sensing the inherent fighting spirit of wizards. The first verse ended. But soon, as the second verse began, everyone instinctively joined in the rhythm. Go go go. Allies allies allies. The simple words and cheerful rhythm made even wizards who couldn't understand English able to sing a few simple lines. Even many wizards from Agadao, Africa, used transfiguration to conjure hand drums and began beating out a most primitive rhythm, the ancient songs celebrating harvest and peace around the fire. Music and emotion. Song and feeling. At this moment, an invisible torrent gradually converged. Feeling a sense of urgency, Ino slowly raised his head. Hundreds of feet in the sky, a faint flame emerged. Within this flame, he clearly sensed the emotions woven within it, a familiar feeling welling up. The flame of Prometheus, the flame he had once seen on the Caucasus Mountains, embodied courage, resistance, wisdom, and praise for self-sacrifice. Similarly, this flame held a fairy tale redemption. But now, within this flame, joy was reinfused. With the combined emotions of 100,000 wizards, the flames in the sky suddenly swelled, and the phantom of a phoenix with a wingspan exceeding 200 feet emerged. Facing this enormous figure, the wizards below felt not fear, but instead a sense of familiarity and affinity. Chew with a melodious, graceful cry, Ino's figure gradually ascended into the sky. Now that their goal had been achieved, it was time to exit. Too much is as bad as too little, as the saying goes. The protagonist of this night was Quidditch, and that would never change. In the sky. Though the silver whale and the red phoenix gradually receded, the Bulgarian national team's powerful entrance reignited the excitement. The Bulgarian players, flying in a triangular formation around the field on broomsticks, suddenly echoed the magnificent stadium with countless bright red flags. Following closely behind was the Irish national team, with their green shamrock formations appearing shortly thereafter. Thousands of flags waved simultaneously, alternating red and green, transforming the stadium into a sea of jubilation. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Newt Stout's Different Phoenix. The entrances of both teams were undeniably well-timed. Not only did they perfectly bridge the gap between the performances, but they also heightened the atmosphere. And now, gentlemen and ladies, the Bulgarian team enters first. Dimitrov, Ivanova, Zagreb, Levski, Volkanov, and Volkov. As Ludo introduced them, the Bulgarian team's pace increased again, almost blurring the lines. Finally, Ludo's voice rose, Seeker, Crumb. At that moment, the cheers practically overwhelmed the entire arena. Even the wizards rooting for Ireland broke into applause and cheers. A world-class Seeker, at the Quidditch World Cup, was like a superstar returning to his home turf. Everyone had to avoid him. He's so cool. In the upper private room, Ron's eyes lit up, and he murmured unconsciously, "Yes, an excellent Seeker." Arthur nodded in approval. Although he wasn't optimistic about the Bulgarian team, Crumb's excellence was clear to all. Meanwhile, in another private room not far from the Wheel-Eye's residence, the atmosphere within the Granger household was polarized. After watching the previous performance, Hermione found Quidditch somewhat dull. But Mr. Granger, a sports enthusiast, was quite the opposite. He viewed any opening ceremony as a prelude to the competition. In any sport, the actual competition was always the true highlight. Meanwhile, in another private room in the arena, Ino cradled a warm, fluffy phoenix, beaming at the two elderly men across from him. A real phoenix. I knew it would succeed. Newt stood up excitedly. Congratulations, Ino and Newt. Your names are destined to go down in history, Dumbledore said, clapping softly, his eyes unable to conceal the satisfaction and relief in his eyes. Haha, thank you, Professor. But rather than writing in history, I prefer being a witness to it. So, let Newt take on the responsibility of writing it down. Ino stroked the phoenix's wings, a sense of blood connection rising within him. He wasn't sure if it was the same between Dumbledore and Fawkes, but the phoenix in his arms felt truly magical. If he had to describe it, it would be like his own child, or perhaps a phoenix-like version of himself. It was a strange feeling. A witness to history. Dumbledore was a little surprised, but then smiled. Yes. The Phoenix is a witness to history. Fawkes has witnessed generations of the Dumbledore family. Newt ignored their conversation, his heart now completely focused on the newly born Phoenix. This Phoenix before him felt different from Fawkes' sacrifice and different from Hannibal's courage. A closer look revealed that the Phoenix embodied both great sacrifice and courageous resistance, but that wasn't all it was. I know, the Phoenix feels different to me. Unable to come up with an answer, Newt opted for a direct question. A resigned smile flickered across Dumbledore's face at the question. Over half a century had passed, and Newt remained the same. He had sensed something was amiss the moment the Phoenix was born. But Dumbledore knew well that some things weren't so straightforward, like the initial questions about the Patronus charm and the magic of flight. Meanwhile, after hearing Newt's question, Ino looked down at the Phoenix in his arms. I call it Kreber. Unlike Fawkes' vibrant red, Kreber's color was closer to the morning sun, a warm and comforting orange-red. Kreber? Healer and regenerator. Newt pondered the name carefully. He quickly grasped the key point, his gaze darting towards the Phoenix's eyes. Warm, pure, clear, and bright as the morning sun. Unlike the chaotic birth of Fiddle, Kreber, upon noticing she was being observed, gently turned her head and met his gaze. For a moment, Newt felt as if he had returned to Hogwarts, to those carefree days. Sensing Kreber's movements, Ino lowered his head, a flicker of fondness in his eyes. Compared to Fighty, he truly loved the Phoenix in his arms. It was an interesting sensibility, to like a rebellious son and a beautiful, adorable daughter. Dumbledore watched the entire process, silent, yet his gaze and demeanor conveyed a profound sense of relaxation. In the box, the days seemed peaceful. However, on the field, the action was fierce. Both the Bulgarian and Irish teams were now fighting tooth and nail, each movement, each flight, a desperate effort. It was a true visual feast, a feast for the eyes for everyone present. Harry, binoculars in hand, watched the field intently. He had never seen such a spectacular match. Although he had served as Gryffindor Seeker and had played many Quidditch matches over the past 3 years, he was considered a seasoned player. But the match before him made Harry realize the difference between the Hogwarts House Cup and the professional competition. Perhaps this can no longer be described as a gap, a chasm might be more appropriate. In fact, not only Harry was shocked, the fierce competition in the game also made everyone feel a little shocked. This was also because all the people present were wizards and did not realize too many problems. But the fact that wizards did not realize the problem does not mean that muggles did not have it. Did they use stimulants? Mr. Granger muttered to himself. He saw with his own eyes that the players from both sides, in order to fight for the flying big ball, actually collided head-on without any regard. Although the two players narrowly missed each other at the last second, the danger of colliding with each other or even falling from a high altitude with a slight delay could not help but make him admire them. Wizards, they really play for their lives. Stimulants. Hearing this word suddenly, Hermione frowned subconsciously. She hated all kinds of cheating. That shouldn't be possible. Even the Felix Felicis was banned before we even started, and no one can escape the potions master's detection. As her potion-making skills improved, Hermione became well aware of the potions master's discerning eye. Some potions didn't even require escape in revealing charm, just the smell could reveal all the ingredients. Perhaps it was the singing. Mrs. Granger opined. I know singing just now evoked a sense of victory, even giving me the urge to enter the community cooking competition. Hearing about the community cooking competition, Hermione gave a helpless expression, as did Mr. Granger. Father and daughter exchanged a glance, each catching a glimpse of fear. What are you looking at? I was just saying. Besides, I won't be creating any new dishes, Mrs. Granger said, a little annoyed. While the lamb kidneys braised in tomatoes and honey might not be particularly appetizing, it definitely retained the original flavor of the ingredients. Besides, she hadn't forced them to finish the last dish, so why would they be so terrified? Chapter 285 Ino's Promise. The game was still going on. Less than half an hour into the match, Ireland had already stormed to a 70-point lead, while Bulgaria remained scoreless. To those unfamiliar with Quidditch, this situation looked like a one-sided massacre. However, many experienced fans saw the trick. Bulgaria had begun the match with a 5-to-1 strategy. Simply put, the 5 players on the field, besides the goalkeeper, 3 chasers, and 2 beaters, were tasked with supporting Crumb. They would grab the quaffle whenever possible, and abandon it if they couldn't. Everything depended on Crumb, aiming to capture the snitch before the score reached 150 points and blitz the match. This strategy might have been successful, but it depended on the strength of the opponent. Facing Ireland, a similarly top-tier team, perhaps even a superior one, the 5-to-1 strategy proved insufficient. Clearly, Ireland had chosen to exploit their opponent's weakness. Since their seekers couldn't match Crumb's lead, they would use points to even the score. It was also a blitzkrieg, aiming to push the score to over 150 before the golden snitch was caught. Both sides had their own plans, but this only benefited the 100,000 spectators. The collision of two lightning bolts sparked more than a few sparks, not to mention the pre-match catalyst. Horizontal ellipsis. The fierce confrontation and tense atmosphere enveloped the entire stadium, but one area remained unaffected. "Professor, what are your plans after the start of the semester?" Ino asked casually in the box. While the story had been altered beyond recognition, the Goblet of Fire was likely unchanged, making him curious about Dumbledore's subsequent plans. After the start of the semester, Dumbledore raised an eyebrow in surprise, but then, as if remembering something, he smiled and said, "The future is not set in stone, it depends on the diviner's choice. However, I am happy to share my plans with you. The Goblet of Fire is a grand event, and it also represents the honor of Europe's 3 magical schools." Dumbledore spoke softly, and Ino remained silent and listened. Meanwhile, the other protagonist in the room, Newt, was already hunched over his desk, seemingly recording something. The Master of Magical Beasts was completely absorbed in his own world, oblivious to the concerns of others. While the outside was bustling with activity, the private room was peaceful and tranquil. A long pause passed. After Dumbledore paused, Ino didn't immediately express his thoughts. It was clear that the old headmaster wasn't about to give up on Harry, or rather, he wasn't willing to give up on anyone. He still wanted to give Harry a chance to face Voldemort one-on-one. Faced with this immense love, Ino couldn't and wouldn't stop him. It was like the trolley problem, one of the 10 great philosophical paradoxes posited by the renowned English ethicist Philip Paffout in 1971. A speeding trolley has 5 people on its original track ahead. If it changes tracks, it could save all 5. However, after the change, there's also a person on the other track, but only one. Should he save one or all 5? This question has long puzzled many. At this moment, Dumbledore offered his answer. Knowing full well that Tom would cause carnage after his resurrection, he still chose to save Harry. It was like the trolley problem. As the driver, Dumbledore didn't change the track to sacrifice that innocent man, but he also didn't abandon the 5 people ahead of him. In this situation, Dumbledore chose to jump off and use his own strength to stop the speeding trolley. Perhaps this seemed impossible to Muggles, but the purpose of magic seemed to be to make the impossible possible. After understanding all this, Ino was deeply moved. "Professor, I may not be able to promise anything else, but as long as I am at Hogwarts, I will do my utmost to ensure the castle's safety." "I've known that." Dumbledore blinked, seemingly unsurprised by the promise. Hearing this, Ino smiled indifferently. It was clear that Dumbledore was still hiding something from him, but it didn't matter, everyone had their secrets. Meanwhile, as time passed, the competition outside intensified, the confrontation becoming more brutal. The Bulgarian team seemed to have an innate resilience. After the score reached 120-0, they realized that their previous strategy had failed. Despite this, they remained steadfast, immediately shifting their strategy and joining the fight for the quaffle. Their efforts were rewarded. After a fierce battle, the score finally reached 130 hours and 10 minutes. While it might seem like the score had broken through 0, many believe Ireland had already secured victory. The Bulgarian boys are very brave and tenacious. Fudge praised with a delighted expression. Due to historical reasons, Ireland had always been a vassal state within the jurisdiction of the English Ministry of Magic. Unlike Fudge's joy, the Bulgarian Minister of Magic looked grim, puzzled by their indecision. If Bulgaria had made the switch when their opponent was leading by 70 points, they still had a fighting chance. But now, with a 130-point lead, it was better to go all out, abandoning pointless interference and defense, and unite to help Crumb capture the snitch. This shift, while seemingly a sign of defiance, was more of an attempt to prolong the match. Then, Ludo's voice echoed through the arena once again. "Look! Lynch has spotted the golden snitch. Ireland should have known about it all along." Ludo didn't need to explain. The Bulgarian players present knew they'd been tricked. Perhaps many things were predetermined. Unlike the original story, although this match was exciting, Bulgaria still didn't win. 2 hours into the match, Krumronsky feinted past Irish seeker Lynch and, amidst cheers, caught a golden snitch. The whistle blew, and the score stood at 170 to 160. Ireland had won the 422nd Quidditch World Cup by a narrow margin of 10 points. This 10-point deficit had displeased many Bulgarian fans. While any discerning eye could see this was the best possible outcome, given the huge gap in points between the two teams, further play would only widen it. Rather than widening the score, it would be better to lose with dignity as it was now. But the wise are always in the minority. The discontent among the fans seemed to be growing, and a sense of restlessness was also spreading. The situation seemed to be getting out of control. The Bulgarian Minister of Magic turned around in surprise, bewildered. He didn't understand what Fudge was talking about. If no action was taken now, a riot would be a disaster. However, Fudge responded with a confident smile. While the Bulgarian minister was still puzzled, the door to the box was pushed open from the outside. Chapter 286 Dumbledore's Dominance, 3 People and 2 Phoenixes. The Bulgarian Minister of Magic looked bewildered. Although a foreigner, he recognized the 3 wizards before him. Dumbledore, the greatest white wizard of the 20th century and headmaster of Hogwarts, Newt Scamander, master of magizoology. Behind them stood the young man who had sung at the beginning, standing on the whale. Time flashback 10 minutes. As the match drew to a close, the socially anxious Newt wanted to leave early. But just as the 3 were about to say goodbye, Chrome brilliantly caught a golden snitch. As top wizards, all 3 present noticed the shift in the atmosphere in the stadium. Faced with this situation, Dumbledore couldn't just sit back and watch. To avoid the tragedy of the original story, Ino followed closely, holding Kleber. 2 of the 3 had left the box, and Newt naturally chose to leave now. He first glanced at Dumbledore, then at Kleber in Ino's arms. As if thinking of something interesting, Newt quietly reached into his pocket. Inside was a bundle of phoenix feathers he had treasured for many years, a gift from Fawkes. Horizontal ellipsis. As the box door opened, Fudge's expression remained unchanged, yet he breathed a sigh of relief. He'd known Dumbledore was at the stadium, had known all along. That was why he'd chosen to remain silent when the signs of unrest began to surface. Fudge knew that stepping forward at this moment was a responsibility. While a successful attempt to appease the crowd would earn him some prestige, a failure would be equally disastrous. His refusal to step forward meant Dumbledore would be the first to take the lead. Sure enough, the greatest white wizard of the 20th century didn't disappoint. Inside the box, Dumbledore wasted no time, walking directly to the stands outside, where the World Cup trophy rested and served as an open-air viewing platform. Gentlemen. Ladies. His voice, magically enchanted, echoed throughout the venue. A magical scene unfolded. Just 2 words, yet they carried a magical force like a mantra, silencing the entire stadium to the naked eye. After locating the source of the sound, everyone simultaneously raised their binoculars. After all, in a match like this, wands might be discarded, but binoculars were essential. Through the telescope, the audience witnessed a magical scene, 3 figures, 2 phoenixes. It's Headmaster Dumbledore. Mr. Scamander. The young man on the whale's back. Many in the audience recognized the figure on the terrace. In this brief discussion, the impetuousness that had previously crept in disappeared. First of all, welcome to England. Dumbledore, changing his usual stilted manner, spoke with great courtesy. This was perfectly natural. In the castle, he was addressing his family, but now he was representing Hogwarts. Thank you to the Bulgarian national team, and also to the Irish national team, for presenting us with a fantastic Quidditch match. As Dumbledore spoke, Ino knew the story of the night seemed to have changed again. While it was unclear whether the Dark Mark would appear as in the original story, with Dumbledore and Newt appearing, whatever had occurred would be suppressed. Even the man from Nurmengard, who had emerged from the tower and even held hands with Voldemort, would be of no use in this moment. Dumbledore continued his speech, but Ino's gaze shifted to Fawkes. After comparing them, it was clear that Kruber was the prettier. Ino had never quite understood the significance of Newt summoning Fawkes with a feather. If it was truly intended to enhance the story of the Phoenix's birth, it was unnecessary. After all, there was a stark difference in appearance between Fawkes and Kruber. After much reflection, He could only attribute it to Newt's playful nature. Perhaps he thought it would be fun, so he resorted to using a precious feather to summon Fawkes. With Dumbledore's appearance and his soothing speech, the stadium returned to its usual calm. The match was over, and the week-long celebration was about to begin. The quadrennial Quidditch World Cup was never a hasty affair. After all, over 90% of the wizards and witches had come from far and wide to compete. It couldn't just end so simplistically, otherwise all those tents would be meaningless. As the 100,000 wizards began to leave the stadium in an orderly manner, they left. In the private room, Sirius also stood up, looking around with great generosity. "All right, kids. Let's get the party started. I'll pay for everything tonight." "Thank you, but I'll give them some pocket money." Mrs. Weasley stopped Sirius. "Forget it. Sirius, we should go for a drink right now." Arthur put his arm around Sirius's shoulders and calmly changed the subject. "Right. We should have a good drink to celebrate our hard-earned victory," Sirius said proudly. It was true. Almost every English wizard, in their traditional mindset, considered Ireland a legitimate territory of their country. Seeing that Sirius didn't mention the bill anymore, Ron's eyes flashed with deep disappointment. It's no exaggeration to say that in that instant, he had already thought of what he wanted to buy: a poster of Krum, a photo album, and if possible, a small souvenir figurine. But now, Ron could only watch Sirius and his father's backs as they gradually left. "Here, Mommy's little Ronnie," George teased, pulling 2 golden galleons from his pocket. "This." George actually gave him pocket money. Ron rubbed his eyes in disbelief, stunned for a moment. "You scared him." "That's the way it should be." Fred snatched the galleons from George's hand and replaced them with 2 sickles. "Oh no." Ron sighed from the depths of his soul. He might not have felt anything at first, but as Fred took it away, a deep pain spread through his body. "You two. Don't bully your brother." Mrs. Weasley couldn't bear to watch. She knew her son well. George had given it to Ron with the intention of giving it to him. But unlike his previous pranks, she didn't want to see Ron being fooled by money. All right. Fred shrugged helplessly and handed the 2 galleons and 2 sickles to Ron. At the same time, George pulled a Gringotts marked purse from his pocket and, without even opening it, thrust it directly into Ginny's hand. Harry looked on with a touch of envy. He wasn't envious of the pocket money, but rather of the Weasley family's affection. Mrs. Weasley had keenly noticed the change in Harry. "Harry, why don't you stay at the Burrow before term starts? It'll be a way for Ron to help out. I haven't noticed him doing any homework since the summer holidays." Honestly, the invitation tempted Harry, but when he thought of Professor Dumbledore's instructions, "Sorry, I'm afraid I can't agree. Although I'd love to go, Professor Dumbledore." Harry reluctantly declined. If he could help it, he really didn't want to go back to Aunt Petunia's. Although the World Cup was over, the campsite had become a sea of joy. Wizards from all over the world gathered together, speaking in broken accents and discussing topics of mutual interest. After saying goodbye to Dumbledore and Newt, Ino strolled through the vast campsite. Various circuses, dazzling fireworks, and a myriad of luminous gadgets turned the place into a true sea of merriment. "This is the World Cup I hoped for." Compared to the sudden events in the original story, the scene before him filled him with satisfaction, even a faint sense of accomplishment. Joy is sometimes contagious. Inside the camp, Ino vanished instantly. A moment later, he reappeared with a candy box on his shoulder. "It's the beginning of the month, Zia-Odi. Please vote. Please vote. Thank you all. Starting today, Zia-Odi will begin sharing magic, Anania. Anania is a healing spell that can clear the airway when someone chokes on food. Slughorn used this spell on Marcos Belby in 1996. In his haste to answer Slughorn's question, Marcos swallowed his food too quickly, choking on it and choking on it. Chapter 287, Dumbledore's illegitimate son. There's no universally agreed upon definition of just how large a camp for 100,000 people is. But one thing is certain, it was bustling tonight. For over half an hour, Ino felt like he was visiting a theme park, a theme called Wizardry. While shopping, he fully grasped the Weasley family's plight. Even with all his restraint, he'd spent nearly 10 galleons. Magic lanterns, golden balloons, Muggle alert devices, rose-shaped badges, tarot cards, a moving star chart, a lunar globe. So many fascinating items, many even banned in England. Yet, during the World Cup, 100,000 wizards flocked to the camp. This, of course, had a lot to do with the Ministry of Magic's deliberate relaxation. After all, in this climate, as long as it wasn't too dangerous or involved large-scale smuggling, the ministry seemed to turn a blind eye. How much is this? Ino asked, word by word. His leisurely stroll led him to discover something interesting, the flying carpet he'd longed for. The flying carpet seller was a bearded, middle-aged wizard with a small cart. Judging by his sunken eyes and prominent nose, he was likely from the Middle East. But he seemed cautious, filling his cart with cheap candies. Hanging from the side was a folded flying carpet, which looked like a decorative ornament from a distance. Perhaps he truly couldn't speak, or perhaps he didn't want to give people a reason to criticize him. Upon hearing the question, the middle-aged wizard first held up 5 fingers, then, as if considering the matter, reduced the number to 4, then clenched his other hand. 40 galleons. Ino finally understood why England was a no-go zone for flying carpets. The price couldn't even compare to a broomstick. Flying carpets costing tens of galleons, and broomsticks costing hundreds, thousands, or even thousands of galleons, the two were simply on a different scale. If flying carpets were to flood the market, no one, except Quidditch players, would be foolish enough to buy a broomstick. After confirming the price, Ino didn't even think about bargaining. Times were different now, after all. He decisively counted out 40 galleons and handed them over. A magical scene occurred. The middle-aged wizard didn't reach for the money. Instead, he gestured toward the cart and then walked 3 meters away. Haha. Okay. Ino was amused. He had truly mastered the art of deceiving others. No conversation, no money, even the transaction was self-service. It seemed that even if caught, he'd have endless excuses. Although he felt it was unnecessary, Ino followed the instructions and completed the self-service transaction. His experience as a fortune teller had taught him the hardships of the lower classes. The transaction went smoothly. After receiving the flying carpet, he continued on his way. The flying carpet was an unexpected gain, but his primary purpose for wandering around was to observe the inertia of fate. However, 2 hours later, nearing midnight, watching the bustling camp, Ino finally realized he'd been overthinking. There were no riots, no Death Eater terrorist attacks, only excitement and joy. This outcome seemed unexpected, but upon closer reflection, it was also reasonable. Dumbledore's final appearance was like a weight that settled the score. No matter what was placed on the other side, it could not tip the scales. The 422nd World Cup, hosted by England, came to a very successful conclusion. The first rays of dawn rose gently from the east. Last night's Quidditch World Cup was like a small interlude. After this brief interlude, a peaceful life was about to begin. In the Black family tent, under the care of Mrs. Weasley, the whole family, including Harry and Sirius, sat around the dining table, enjoying a delicious breakfast. At this moment, an untimely voice sounded from outside the tent. They're really crazy. The entire Daily Prophet is crazy. Arthur shook his head and walked into the tent. That reporter named Rita again. Mrs. Weasley took over. God knows how she gets all that secret information. It's not secret information this time, it's a complete freak-out, Arthur sighed helplessly. Their exchange successfully captured the attention of everyone at the table. Sirius immediately stood up and took the newspaper Arthur had brought back. PFFT. Ha. They don't think about Dumbledore's age, and they dare to make such ridiculous jokes. Sirius scoffed, then spread the newspaper out on the table. Now everyone at the table could see the contents. Ron even read aloud, Dumbledore's illegitimate son left in the Muggle world. Merlin. The bold black headline was accompanied by a high-definition photo of Dumbledore standing on a terrace, with Ino holding a phoenix beside him. The photo was angled strangely, as if some kind of distorted imagery had been used to create a more similar look. As Ron read the headline, everyone's composure erupted. Mrs. Weasley put down her cutlery and picked up the newspaper to read. The same phoenix, and both their outstanding student years, which makes us doubt the relationship between them. Madness. Mrs. Weasley put down the newspaper and gave a brief but emphatic assessment. More than crazy, it's utterly ridiculous. Sirius nodded, then echoed, they don't even consider the age difference between the two. They're just as good as that Novellis, Snape's illegitimate child, instead of Dumbledore. After all, they're both Slytherins. Sirius. Mrs. Weasley put down the newspaper with a hint of anger. Perhaps because of the care she'd given him during the prison break, or perhaps because of the age difference? Sirius still had a deep respect for Mrs. Weasley. Seeing her angry, he immediately showed a strong desire to survive. Ha ha ha, I was just talking nonsense. It's all the fault of that reporter named Rita, writing such nonsense all the time. That reporter will get her comeuppance sooner or later, Arthur said firmly at the table. Unlike the others, Harry gazed thoughtfully at the photo. Having met them recently, he'd genuinely felt a resemblance between Ino and Professor Dumbledore. While he didn't agree with the ridiculous illegitimate child theory, the two of them certainly gave him a similar feeling, the most obvious being peace of mind. This was especially true before learning Occlumency, when he'd been plagued by nightmares and headaches. It was as if these ailments had a consciousness of their own. Whenever he was around them, they would be greatly alleviated, or even disappear. Chapter 288, Visit to Nicholas Flamel. The Daily Prophet's report sparked widespread discussion across the British Isles. While many dismissed it with amusement, a few took it seriously, likely those low-ranking wizards who were foolish enough to believe Rita. Unlike newspapers, which were widely available, another article in a wizarding academic journal truly caused a stir, albeit within academia. Newt Scamander's article, "The Phoenix Should Not Be Classified as a Magical Beast," was immediately reprinted in numerous academic journals, including Transfiguration Today, Modern Wizarding Development Studies, and The Potions Guide. This was understandable, as the most remarkable of magical creatures, the Phoenix's existence has always been shrouded in mystery. No one knows how it reproduces or where it originates. Even those who have been lucky enough to see a phoenix in the wild have only fleeting glimpses. Yet, despite this, wizards never gave up their study of the phoenix. Whether it was the magic of rebirth, the healing tears, or the alchemical uses of its tail feathers, all of it was incredibly valuable. For this reason, Newt's articles were widely reprinted worldwide. While academic journals had a smaller audience, their value surpassed even the Daily Prophet. Together, Newt and Rita successfully brought Ino to the forefront of public opinion. As the person involved, Ino paid little attention to the outside world's commotion. He was strolling down the famous Champs-Élysées, suitcase in hand. With the rise of French capitalism in the 19th century, the Champs-Élysées had become a renowned shopping destination. But his purpose wasn't to shop, he was to visit a true legend. Who would have thought that the legendary alchemist, Nicholas Flamel, who lived for nearly 700 years, would live in seclusion on the bustling Champs-Élysées? When Fawkes delivered the note with the address, Ino's initial reaction was unreal, but he quickly dismissed the thought. After all, this street was built in 1771 and renamed the Champs-Élysées in 1789. Perhaps it was still deserted when Nico settled there. After finding a Chanel store, Ino pulled out a slip of paper from his pocket. Just seeing the address, the bustling commercial street ahead seemed to be obliterated by a mysterious force, and a vast courtyard appeared out of thin air before him. Above the courtyard's main entrance, eerily carved pairs of eyes, seemingly alive, stared intently ahead. The scene was truly eerie, but Ino unconcerned, raising the slip of paper in his hand. Like a muddled door barrier, the eyes closed in unison upon seeing the slip, and the courtyard gate opened automatically. Seeing this, Ino didn't rush in, but paused at the door lintel to examine the closed eyes carefully. For a moment, he sensed a glimmer of life in these sculptural eyes. This was strange, for no matter how realistic the transfiguration or the mastery of alchemy, the objects created were essentially lifeless. Magic couldn't bring the dead back to life, nor could it create life. But the fleeting flash of vitality he'd experienced earlier made him doubt the so-called rules of magic. Ino knew his intuition was correct. There were only two possibilities: either the so-called rules of magic weren't rules, or Nico possessed a more sophisticated alchemical method. Interesting. Ino sighed inwardly, then stepped into the courtyard. As he stepped over the threshold, the magical scene unfolded again. What had previously looked like the interior of a courtyard had transformed into a modern room, fully equipped with air conditioning, fans, televisions, and chandeliers. But before he could take a closer look, an elderly voice echoed from the room. "Welcome, young alchemist." Hearing this, Ino turned and saw the legendary alchemist in the corner of the room. To his surprise, he wasn't, as he'd expected, an extremely fragile old man with eyes as bright as the stars, full of wisdom. Nicholas Flamel before him gave him a single word: ordinary. His graying hair, paired with the loose robes, and his face, though pale and bloodless, seemed perfectly normal. He resembled an elderly man who had long avoided the sun and remained idle at home after retirement. Despite his ordinary appearance, Ino showed no disdain. He bowed slightly and politely greeted him. "Good day, Mr. Flamel. Don't be so reserved. Please take a seat." Nicholas Flamel smiled and nodded, gesturing to an unused sofa nearby. He had received Dumbledore's letter months earlier and learned much about the young man before him. He had assumed such a gifted young wizard would be full of arrogance. But upon meeting him, Nicholas Flamel found nothing like his imagination. His earlier behavior outside the door, as well as his current composure, had instilled a liking in him. Meanwhile, after Ino sat down, a clamorous noise could be heard from afar. Glancing sideways, he discovered they were all tiny figures, approximately 3 inches tall. At first glance, there were more than a dozen of them. They chanted in unison, carrying teacups much larger than themselves as they struggled towards him. This scene immediately piqued Ino's interest, as it reminded him of Tom and Jerry in the valley. The ice sculpture's transformations, like the alchemical figurines before him, were both products of a different kind and transfiguration. The difference was that these little creatures appeared incredibly agile and intelligent. This assessment stemmed from the fact that after a brief delay, they had successfully climbed onto the coffee table. Then, like a ladder, they formed a 2-foot-tall giant. The previously enormous teacup and teapot were now effortlessly carried in the giant's hands. However, the good times didn't last long. The figurine, seemingly acting as its arm, slipped and lost its grip on the teapot, sending scalding water cascading down the coffee table onto the giant's feet. "Ugh! Pull it up quickly. I'm being burned." The figurine cried for help. Seeing this, even though he knew it was fake, Ino still reached out his finger and tapped the coffee table. The scalding water visibly froze into frost. "Phew! Saved!" the scalded figurine exclaimed with lingering fear. A few minutes later. "They're interesting." Ino looked up at Nicholas Flamel. His brief observation revealed something special about these figurines. They weren't like wizard chess, with preset actions and dialogue. They were truly alive, akin to artificial intelligence and Muggle theory. They could think and even possess a concept of self. This revelation reminded Ino of the fairy tales of Hans Christian Andersen. Unlike the bizarre and adventurous stories of the Brothers Grimm, Andersen's stories were more gentle and dreamy. If I had to give an example, the Brothers Grimm were more like adventurers, while Andersen was more like a bard. Because in Andersen's stories, including The Old Street Lamp, Thumbelina, The Teapot, The Ugly Duckling, The Princess and the Pea, it seems that the story of anthropomorphic objects has been enduring in Andersen's fairy tales. Sorry everyone, I only wrote 2 pictures today, mainly about Nico. I thought about it for a long time. Sorry. Chapter 289. Want to be the protagonist for the second time. In fact, many things require a change of mindset. In a flash, Ino's mind raced through many thoughts. A slightly absurd, yet somewhat plausible, hypothesis emerged. If it was correct, perhaps he could once again experience the treatment of a protagonist. While he couldn't choose the fantasy world, he possessed a tool that allowed him to enter it with pinpoint accuracy, a tool that had once provided him with a foundation for survival. At this thought, Ino's lips curled slightly. The stories of the Brothers Grimm were his most fruitful experience to date. Not only had he completely absorbed the flame of redemption into himself, transforming once consumable matches into an unlimited flame, but he had also discovered 2 epic magical books within the tower. One on resurrection, the other on time. And this, then, was the treatment of a protagonist. As Ino pondered, Nicholas Flamel looked kindly at the small figurine on the table. "Time and the years are always fair. While Perenelle and I have gained a long life, we have also lost many things. For so long, only these little ones can keep me company." Nicholas Flamel sighed softly, his words filled with nostalgia for the passing years. "You are right, it is indeed so." Ino agreed, then lamented, "When you gain immortality, you truly cannot make friends with ordinary people anymore. For it is not only a separation, but also a curse bestowed by time." Naturally, he thought of Middle-earth, of Lily, the little girl who had become a grandmother, of the aged Theoden, of the 3 young men of Rohan. Perhaps, the next time he entered Middle-earth, his old friends might be gone, and the young men might be old. However, what Ino didn't know was that his heartfelt sigh resonated deeply with Nicholas Flamel. The curse bestowed by time. Nicholas Flamel whispered to himself. The words touched him deeply. Over the past nearly 700 years, he had seen so many friends depart, forcing him to a semi-secluded existence. Nicole extended his hand, his pale skin and fragile frame seeming to bear witness to curse. Perhaps, my curse may soon be over. But Nicole Flamel shook his head slightly, glancing across at the man with a meaningful expression. Haha, then, I wish you a pleasant journey in advance. Ino chuckled in response. He sensed Nicole Flamel seemed to have sensed something. But there were things he hadn't carefully concealed, otherwise he wouldn't have echoed his lament about the passing of time. Of course, not hiding things didn't mean being honest, everything he said and did was simply true to himself. As for Nicole's guess, Ino was indifferent. What difference did it make? There might be wizards in the magical world he couldn't defeat, but right now, there were none that could threaten his life. Thank you for your blessing. Nicole Flamel replied with a smile. Although it had been a mere guess at first, the calm demeanor of the young man before him made him realize his suspicions were likely correct. Thinking of this, Nicole's gaze drifted again to the puppets on the tabletop, which were now lined up, skiing across the ice. The tea that had just spilled had now become a playground for these little creatures. Following Nicholas Flamel's gaze, Ino also noticed this amusing scene. He tapped the tabletop again, and the entire place suddenly transformed into a world of ice and snow. A foot-high slide, an exquisite carousel, a dozen seesaws arranged in pairs, a miniature amusement park was instantly complete. Seeing the new toys, the 3-inch dolls all ran over. Nicholas Flamel glanced at the dolls fondly, then looked up again. I thought this meeting would be a chance to mentor the younger generation, but I didn't expect to make new friends before I left. It's my honor. Ino responded politely, adding modestly, but seeking alchemical guidance is also the purpose of my visit. Hearing this straightforward statement, Nicholas Flamel smiled and clapped his hands. A cabinet in the room opened automatically, and 2 books with ancient covers floated lightly, landing on the table. This is knowledge related to the two-way mirror and the mirror of Erased. It was originally destined for Boxbuttons, but after receiving Albus's letter, I changed my mind. Perhaps you could copy a copy for your safekeeping. Thank you for your generosity. Ino took the books decisively. The visionoscope, after all, was derived from the two-way mirror and the mirror of Erased. Although he had deciphered the final alchemical formula with the help of a bronze oil lamp, he didn't understand the specific details. It was like a Muggle math problem, only the answer was visible, not the process. This also meant that the visionoscope's function was limited to image storage and playback, not a true television. Ino felt a slight ripple in his heart. However, Nicholas Flamel was also somewhat surprised. Over the long years, he had met countless alchemists, and each one of them would inevitably be ecstatic when they encountered lost knowledge. But the young man before him seemed a little too calm. Hogwarts has books about it. Nico asked curiously. Hogwarts. Ino was stunned. But upon seeing Nico's expression, he quickly understood. It's just my gift. It allows me to see hidden knowledge, so I've prepared a lot of things. Under Nico's gaze, Ino pulled out a piece of parchment he had prepared from his briefcase. He had once taken a photo of Hermione holding the time turner during the Halloween pumpkin carriage, and he had since copied it out exactly. He chose this instead of the more practical Ravenclaw item because of the time turner's unique nature. Perhaps only by understanding the properties of time can one understand the magical book about it. With a long lifespan, many of the remaining knowledge can actually be accumulated slowly. After taking the parchment, Nicholas Flamel's gaze suddenly became profound. He had assumed that the hidden knowledge he saw was just a simple trinket, but the content of the photo forced him to reconsider the young man before him. A circular loop, 12 distinct symbols. At a glance, he recognized the alchemical formula for the time turner. How unexpected. At the same time, Ino also noticed Nicholas Flamel's transformation. Especially after he set down the parchment, he seemed to be lost in some memories. He remained unfazed by the situation, his gaze returning to the coffee table. The vivid little figures before him gave him the idea of filming a movie with a cinemascope. The magical special effects combined with these real little actors were far superior to the awkward acting of the little wizards in the castle. Chapter 290, Incomplete Top-Level Alchemical Items. In a fleeting moment of recollection, Nicholas Flamel recalled many things from the depths of his memory. For a moment, I'm truly surprised. I never thought there were 2 people in this world capable of deciphering the secrets of the time turner to such an extent. Nicholas' voice was filled with sighs, but a hint of hidden joy was clearly audible. However, Ino frowned slightly, having heard something else in his words. To such an extent? You mean? Yes. It's incomplete. Nicholas Flamel naturally took over. To be precise, every time turner is incomplete. Like the Philosopher's Stone, they are all incomplete. Incomplete? Incomplete. Ino's voice suddenly rose a few degrees. It wasn't because he couldn't control his decibel level, but more because Nicholas's words were so bizarre. An incomplete time turner, an incomplete Philosopher's Stone. It felt like the high-end alchemy in the magical world was all defective. It was hard to imagine what they would look like if they were complete. Facing Ino's astonishment, Nicholas Flamel suddenly chuckled. I suppose you've only studied one time turner. Just like me, when I was about 200 years old. Time seemed to have returned to the past, after decades of deciphering the code, only to discover the prototype was a defective artifact. Every time turner is different. Perhaps you can think of it like taking a picture of a functioning alarm clock with a camera. Time naturally passes, and even if you take pictures at an infinite rate, each picture will differ from the previous one. Nicholas Flamel's vivid analogy gradually grasped Ino's meaning, but at the same time, a new doubt arose. Mr. Flamel. If you follow your analogy, there must be a complete alarm clock behind all of this. Yes. A complete alarm clock. Nicholas nodded naturally, then pointed to the alarm clock in the room. The intact alarm clock behind you represents the natural flow of time in this world. And the time turner, you can think of it as a projection of that flow. This explains why we can't go back and change what's already happened. Because a shadow is always a shadow. Ino said slowly, adding to Nico's silence. The time turner is like a forged pass, granting its bearer temporary access to the house of time. But within this house, they can only see and hear, not touch anything. Because the pass is fake, if discovered by the owner, they will face severe punishment. This also demonstrates why countless wizards throughout history have suffered irreversible damage due to improper use of the time turner. A moment passed. It seems you understand. Nico picked up the parchment on the table again. The alchemical circuits within were still clearly visible. That's why I said it's defective. You can't recreate the alarm clock from a photo, just like a time turner can't be manufactured. Hearing this, Ino asked, somewhat puzzled, then how did the time turner appear? Who knows? Nico spread his hands helplessly, saying humorously, I'm not even 700 years old. You can't expect me to know all the secrets. Okay. You're right. Ino didn't notice Nico's humor, instead finding it perfectly normal. Compared to the elves of Middle-earth, who often lived for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, 700 years was indeed a bit underwhelming. However, Ino's bland reaction left Nico Flamel somewhat uneasy. His once perfect humor seemed to have lost its effectiveness. Although I don't know much about the time turner, we can discuss another incomplete item. But that's for later, as my lunch break is up. As he spoke, Nicole's gaze returned to the parchment. If the two-way mirror or the mirror of Ares had been merely guidance for the younger generation, but with the appearance of the time turner, he had already placed the young man before him on an equal footing. Furthermore, while he might appear young, his actual age might be more than meets the eye. Ino hadn't noticed Nico's shift in attitude, but upon hearing about the other incomplete object, the first thing he thought of was the Philosopher's Stone. He was somewhat surprised by Nico Flamel's generosity, but then he realized he was just as generous, having casually taken out the time turner's alchemical circuit. It seemed like this was the kind of academic exchange that alchemists should have. Meanwhile, when Nico Flamel suggested a nap, across the sea in England, another nap-related episode unfolded. At 4 Privet Drive, London, Harry sat up abruptly in bed, gasping for air in shock. After lunch, he returned to his second-floor compartment as usual. After all, after the previous incident, he would now, at all costs, avoid contact with Aunt Petunia and her family. However, after returning to his room, lacking entertainment and socializing, Harry could only sleep to pass the time. As for reading and summer homework, those were entirely for after school started. But such an ordinary nap brought him to a horrifying scene. From a first-person perspective, a dark wizard, whose face could not be seen, brutally murdered a muggle. The muggle's body was devoured by a giant python that looked at least a foot thick. Same perspective, same dream, but this time Harry chose not to hide it, intending to tell Dumbledore immediately. He unfolded the parchment and wrote down everything he had seen and heard in his dream. After watching Hedwig leave, Harry hesitated for a moment, then took out the parchment again and copied out the contents of the letter again. However, as Hedwig delivered the letter, Nicholas Flamel, far away in Paris, also woke from a short nap. Perhaps due to his frail body, Nicholas did not sit up immediately after waking. Instead, he turned his head and looked at the doll standing by his bed with a burning gaze. A puppet, about 3 feet tall and resembling a 7 to 8-year-old boy. "Rick, I may have found a way to keep you alive." However, before Nicholas Flamel could finish, the puppet interrupted him. "My mission was to accompany you in Paranel. She's gone. And my mission, then, is to accompany you." Hearing the puppet's answer, Nicholas's face showed a complex expression, one of relief and guilt. "Don't you long to live?" "To live?" A faint smile flashed across the puppet's face, but it quickly disappeared. "Have I truly lived?" If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291, Farewell. After half a month, the years are like a song. It was dusk. The setting sun, like an aged painter, painted a breathtaking scene across the sky with its most vibrant brushstrokes. At that moment, Ino stood quietly by the window, admiring the view. Today was the day he and Nicole would say goodbye. Horizontal ellipsis. Time seemed to slip by unnoticed. Before he knew it, Ino had already been in France for over 2 weeks, with less than a week left until Hogwarts. During this time together, he had not only exchanged knowledge of alchemy with Nicole, but also learned many anecdotes hidden in history. Overall, it had been a very pleasant time. His only regret was that there were so few people to chat with. After all, Nicole Flamel's secluded retreat was likely protected by the Fidelius charm. Under such a powerful protective spell, even a phoenix wouldn't be able to accurately locate it, let alone an owl. Fortunately, the regret was only temporary. On his third day, Ino remembered another nearly forgotten item, a true two-way mirror. After Hermione gifted him this mirror, they'd used it only a handful of times. The most recent time, at the Quidditch World Cup, was when Hermione had contacted him through the mirror, inviting him to a match. However, due to his opening performance, he had politely declined. The last time he'd used the mirror seemed so long ago that he couldn't even remember. However, none of that mattered anymore. After remembering it, Ino made every effort. In his spare time, he'd even chat with Hermione. After all, aside from Nicholas Flamel, only the original figurines remained. And somehow, over time, these figurines seemed less lively than they once were. Similarly, each one had grown listless, lacking their former energy. Ino had some theories. After all, after learning about the Philosopher's Stone, he understood why Nicholas Flamel had described it as broken. As one of the most powerful alchemical artifacts, the Philosopher's Stone was designed to break rules, or rather, to replace them. Just like Gam's basic law of transmutation, magic can't conjure food out of thin air. However, once a wizard possesses a complete Philosopher's Stone, they can use the magic within it to create food from thin air. This glimpse reveals the whole picture, and Ino was deeply shocked after learning this. Although it was just a simple act of conjuring food, the underlying principles were profound. Magic can't conjure food out of thin air, that's a rule. Magic can't bring the dead back to life, that's also a rule. Similarly, magic can't create life. And the so-called elixir of life is just one of the most insignificant effects of the Philosopher's Stone. Sadly, Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone was broken, so broken that only its most insignificant effect remained. It seems that all the best things have inherent imperfections. By the window, gazing at the darkening sky, Ino's thoughts drifted away until a clear voice came from beside him. "It's time for dinner. Come with me." Hearing the familiar voice, Ino ducked his head. Standing at his ankle was a small, approximately 3-inch puppet. At this moment, he was pulling at his trouser leg, his head held high as he shouted loudly, his delicate face filled with anxiety. Without hesitation, Ino knelt down and gently scooped up the palm-sized doll. It was one of the few active dolls, and the same doll that had been scalded by the hot tea. "Let's go eat." Holding the doll in one hand, he headed towards the dining room. Honestly, Despite Nico's apartment-like living space, it felt like a vast maze. Each door opened at a different time, leading to a different room. Once, because he didn't understand this, he'd entered dozens of different rooms, finally needing the doll's help to find his guest room. Since then, the doll has become his personal guide, the one he now holds in his hands. Led by the doll, Ino once again arrived at a familiar dining room. However, Nico wasn't there this time, which didn't surprise him. After all, an elderly man so frail, he probably couldn't digest any more food. At every meal, he ate while Nico drank his potion. It seemed reasonable to occasionally drink his potion in a different place, but today, at parting, Nico had chosen to disappear. Though surprised, he didn't dwell on it, focusing on the present moment. Dinner was once again a sumptuous French feast, a fragrant bouillabaisse, a beef stew in red wine, a smattering of niçoise salad, and a whole pan-fried foie gras. The enjoyment of good food always brings joy. However, halfway through the meal, Nico Flamel slowly entered the dining room, followed by a puppet resembling a little boy, about 3 feet tall. In the puppet's hands, it carried another, more rustic suitcase. "Good evening, Mr. Flamel." Ino put down his cutlery and wiped his mouth with a napkin. "Just now, for a moment, I thought you wouldn't see me off." "How could that be?" "I was just packing some parting gifts for you," Nico chuckled, gesturing to the suitcase in the puppet's hands. "Here are all the books for you. After thinking about it, leaving them at Boxburton's just got tucked away, so I'm just giving them to you." "Haha, thank you. But after I finish reading them, I'll find a way to copy them and send them to Boxburton's." Faced with Nico's generosity, Ino also expressed his reluctance to keep them. "As you wish. I've done enough for my alma mater anyway." Nico smiled and nodded. "The reason I was late just now is because of this child. He's always shy, but I wanted to introduce him to you. His name is Rick, and he's been with me for over 500 years. I hope that after I die, someone will still remember him." Hogsmeade. With a flash of orange light, Ino returned to the long-lost cottage. "Is this my future home?" A clear voice rang out, and then Ino saw a small hood pop out from the pocket of his robe. "Yes, your future home." Ino took the small doll from his pocket and gently placed it on the soft bed. But whenever he saw the puppet, he kept thinking of the little boy named Rick beside Nico. He'd thought Nico would entrust him to him, but who would have thought it was just an introduction? "I just want another person with a long life to remember him," the child Perenelle and I once had. Using his own life to nourish the puppet, Nico seemed to have truly performed some forbidden alchemy. But no matter what, what's gone is gone. The incomplete Philosopher's Stone had already exhausted Nicholas Flamel's life. The thought made Ino laugh. It wasn't his place to judge the right or wrong of others' choices. He turned his head quietly, his eyes casually glancing at the desk calendar. Time seemed to have stopped at the moment he'd left. With a gentle snap of his fingers, the calendar began to turn pages automatically. After a long moment, it finally stopped at the number 27. August 27, 1994. The beginning of the month. Zaya Odi, please vote, please vote, please vote. Today's sharing, the Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a man-made red stone with magical properties. It can be used to create an elixir that prolongs the life of the drinker and can also transmute any metal into pure gold. The renowned alchemist Nicholas Flamel created the only known instance of the stone as of 1991. Flamel used it to create the elixir, extending the lives of himself and his wife, Perenelle, for over 6 centuries. Chapter 292 One Man's Alchemy Factory. Sometimes not everyone loves solitude. Most, perhaps out of necessity, have conditioned themselves to it. Hogsmeade Cottage. In the second-floor bedroom, Ino used transfiguration to create a life-size bed for the doll, along with some matching miniature furniture. After completing this, he opened another suitcase Nico had given him. The suitcase was made from the skin of a tipo warthog. While its design looked very retro, perhaps even dating back to the Middle Ages, it was also quite practical. Tipo warthogs are highly prized magical creatures by wizards. Their skins are not only commonly used as shields, but are also a material for invisibility cloaks. Compared to invisibility cloaks made from invisibility beasts, tipo warthogs are even more valuable, perhaps due to their extremely strong defensive properties. Perhaps because it was just a suitcase, Nico hadn't utilized the tipo warthog's invisibility properties. However, these were minor issues, and Ino didn't mind them. It was something he could easily accomplish at some point. Besides, he had long planned to upgrade to a new suitcase. Now, with a readily available, high-end product, requiring only a little refinement, its stealth and defensive capabilities far surpassed those of the original suitcase. But that was a matter for another time. He now intended to see what Nico had left inside the suitcase. Opening the suitcase, Ino climbed the ladder and entered the seamlessly extended space within. The space wasn't large, measuring only a few dozen square meters, the size of a room. The layout was rather bare, with the only two pieces of furniture being walnut bookshelves lining the walls. One of the 10-foot-tall shelves was filled with books and antique bindings. The adjacent shelf held dozens of miniature figurines of various shapes. Ino was familiar with these figurines. They were the little figures that had served tea and water. But their uses were much more than that. In his previous conversations with Nico, he had learned of their abilities. Not only could they handle daily household tasks like house elves, such as washing and cooking, but they could also become excellent alchemical assistants, even crafting their own alchemical items. But puzzlingly, they now lay quietly on the bookshelf. It seemed. Nico had considered this, and had placed an unopened letter next to the bookshelf. A few minutes later, Ino reluctantly put the letter down. He now understood Nico's meaning. Similarly, he also understood why these alchemist-like figurines appeared here, rather than being donated to Boxburtons as an inheritance. What an equal exchange. Ino sighed wistfully. These figurines, unlike wizard chess pieces or other alchemical tools, were powered solely by magic. They relied on the philosopher's stone, or rather, life force. The wizard traded a year of his own life for a year of the figurine's vitality. With such harsh conditions, it's easy to understand why Nicholas Flamel was reluctant to leave them at Boxburtons. Trading a life for another, not everyone can afford such a price. If they were just toys, it would be fine, after all, with little value, and no one would foolishly waste their lives on them. But these figurines were practically the equivalent of alchemists. If this thing were to get out, the annual number of missing wizards would likely double. However, Ino was delighted, even a little excited, by the demanding conditions. It felt like it was tailor-made for him. It was simply due to the nature of fantasy worlds, the time travel. Once inside, even if these dozens of figurines were kept alive, their lifespan would only last a few decades. When the story concluded, they would return to their pre-entry state. It was like a card loop. He could even achieve greater ease than Nicholas Flamel, keeping the figurines intact and indefinitely alive. Why open an alchemy factory? I'm a mobile factory. Ino looked at the figurines before him with delight. With these little creatures, why bother hiring alchemists? Forget about mass-producing cinescopes. If he really had the guts, he could even seize control of any other alchemy market, including the wand market. But that was just a thought. Just like his research on cinescopes, his original goal was simply to make the magical world more vibrant. If it were simply for galleons, he wouldn't have recruited so many people. Half an hour later, Ino emerged from the traceless extended suitcase. It was already pitch black outside the window. Hogsmeade seemed remarkably peaceful in the night. The rows of houses, with the occasional light on, gave it a truly cozy feel. Taking one last look at the view outside, Ino withdrew his gaze and headed straight for his bed. After more than 2 weeks of traveling, he missed the feeling of sleeping at home immensely. Early morning. A crisp knocking sound made Ino slowly open his eyes. He was greeted by an unfamiliar owl. Although he didn't recognize it, he still opened the window to let in this distant messenger. Only after opening the window was he surprised to find several letters already piled on the windowsill. They must have been a backlog from his time in France. After collecting the scattered letters, Ino brought a bowl of water and a few nuts to entertain this special guest. As the owl happily savored its meal, he noticed the wax-encrusted letter tied to its leg. A large H on it made it clear where the letter came from. Perhaps because the current headmaster was from Gryffindor, the wax seal had been bright red. He opened the envelope and, as expected, it was the fourth-year application form. While most of the textbooks remained largely unchanged, some core courses had been updated. These included Standard Spells, Intermediate Transfiguration Guide, and Intermediate Potions Making. Fourth year. Staring at the letter in his hand, Ino felt a sense of daze. 3 years had already passed without him realizing it. Hiding in the bridge arch, secretly practicing fire spells, it seemed like only yesterday. A sense of time passing, of things changing and people changing, came over him. After a brief moment of reminiscing, Ino's gaze shifted to the several letters that had been scattered on the windowsill. One was from Newt, and it contained a message about academic feedback on the theory of the phoenix's birth, and even about some people already beginning to research it. However, Ino completely scoffed at such an idea. With such a deliberate act, let alone the birth of a phoenix, simply focusing the core emotion of the flame would block all avenues. The known phoenix's fireworks stemmed from the Quidditch player's unyielding determination, foxes from the great sacrifice of Dumbledore's ancestors, fids from the ultimate curse of the Dance of the Snow, and cribs from the hope for peace of over 10,000 people in Rohan. All of these were pure emotions. Even the slightest distraction would prevent the flame from gathering its color. Putting Newt's letter aside, Ino looked at the next one, and was surprised to find it was from Harry. Harry's letter was short, recounting a dream. A dark wizard, whose face could not be seen, killed a muggle, who was then swallowed by a python. Chapter 293 Trelawney's Prophecy, Dumbledore's Death. Time always seemed to slip by unnoticed. September 1st, 1994. At King's Cross Station, the Hogwarts Express sat quietly on the tracks. Countless newly enrolled young wizards, accompanied by their families, gazed curiously at their surroundings, each radiating a hint of excitement. Whether from Muggle or wizarding families, Hogwarts was a place of longing for young wizards. This was especially true for wizarding families, who had only heard of it since childhood but had never actually visited this renowned school of magic. Platform 9 and 3/4. Ino crossed the beams leading to the wizarding world alone. The familiar scene before him brought a sense of relief. But that relief quickly faded, replaced by harmless gazes. Raising his head, Ino quietly glanced around. He was met with curious, inquiring eyes, but thankfully, they were restrained and didn't rashly approach to interrupt. He had been prepared for this temporary onlooker situation. After all, fame comes at a price. He smiled politely and headed for the train. While he didn't mind being watched, he didn't want to be a mascot. Ino. A familiar voice came from the distance. Ino stopped and turned to look behind him. Long time no see, Harry. Huh? Finally, you've arrived. Harry breathed a sigh of relief. Perhaps his voice was changing, making Harry's voice sound slightly hoarse. Wait for me. Ino raised an eyebrow in confusion, but then he remembered the letter he had read a few days ago. Harry, don't worry. You're absolutely safe at Hogwarts. I'm not questioning Hogwarts, I just feel a little uneasy. Harry looked apologetic. After all, the dream he had had during his nap that day was too real, and he couldn't stop remembering the look in the muggle's eyes when he died. Okay. But this isn't the place to chat? Let's get on the train first. Ino saw Harry's fear, but he thought it was normal. Without the training of the previous 2 years, Harry was essentially just a 15-year-old boy. Witnessing the murder scene firsthand, it was understandable that he felt some trauma. However, this also reminded him, could Harry, without any training, still possess the courage to face Voldemort head-on, as he did in the original story? Hogwarts Express. After entering the carriage, Ino randomly found an empty compartment and walked in with Harry. They paid no heed to the castle's implicit traditions, such as Gryffindors not sitting with Slytherins. Honestly, with the passage of time, or rather, with the graduation of each class, the overall atmosphere at Hogwarts had become quite positive. He didn't see the same house rivalry as in the original story. While there was still some conflict, it was less tense and tense, with disagreements leading to fights. Meanwhile, after entering his compartment, Harry felt unusually relaxed, a gentle sense of peace lingering in his heart. I know, that dream I had earlier really made me uneasy. I have a feeling something might happen this year, Harry confided in the train compartment. What? You should leave the predictions to Professor Trelawney. Though joking, Ino felt a sense of wonder at what Harry said. It seemed Wizard's intuition was sometimes quite reliable. While Dumbledore's plans were unclear, judging by his personality, he'd likely planned something beforehand. That swindling con woman? Don't mention her. Harry's voice rose sharply upon hearing Trelawney's name. What did she say? Did she predict you? Seeing Harry's unusual reaction, Ino grew curious. This divination professor, with the blood of a prophet, could sometimes make true predictions. She made a very unreliable prediction. Harry's face tinged with anger. Before the summer break last semester, after the last divination class, That swindler came up to me like a madman and told me I would kill Professor Dumbledore and inside the train compartment. Although Harry continued to ramble on, Ino was no longer in the mood to listen. Trelawney had predicted Dumbledore's death, and that Harry would be the murderer. At first glance, it all seemed absurd. But with enough information, looking back at the prophecy, it seemed reasonable. Ino happened to know enough people. He was also wondering if Harry had truly been influenced by Voldemort, temporarily controlled by the remnant of the spirit in his scar, and had rashly attacked Dumbledore. Given the old headmaster's character, he would certainly not harm Harry, and the prophecy would most likely come true. After all, Voldemort was simply unable to defeat Dumbledore, but no one could say he was weak and incompetent. At this thought, Ino suddenly felt that things had gotten a little out of hand. If necessary, he wouldn't mind being the villain for once. Meanwhile, Harry noticed that after the prophecy, Ino had fallen into a state of deep thought, even giving him a strange look. They're all crazy. How could I possibly hurt Professor Dumbledore? Perhaps from excitement, Harry's cheeks flushed strangely. However, just as Ino was about to say something, the compartment door was opened from the outside. You guys. Outside, Draco, dressed in a sharp suit, appeared. When Draco heard Ino was in this compartment, he had come alone. After all, the four of them had always sat together at the start of the term. But today, the scene inside left him somewhat bewildered. Scarhead, his face flushed, Ino, smiling. Inside the compartment, Ino, seeing Draco's eyes and demeanor, felt that the boy's thoughts had become impure as he grew up. Just as he was about to say something, another voice rang out from outside. Malfoy, what are you going to do to Harry? Ron demanded, with Hermione and Ginny standing behind him. Unlike Ron, who was slow to react, the two Gryffindor girls also wore strange expressions upon seeing the scene in the compartment. Subconsciously, Hermione and Ginny exchanged a glance, each seeming to see a trace of bitterness in the other's eyes. All right. Let's stop here. Ino stood up decisively. Harry, don't overthink it. No one believes Trelawney's prophecy. After saying that, Ino dragged Draco away. He didn't want to stay in this troubled place anymore. Thanks to Ron, the loud shouting in the corridor had already made many young wizards pop their heads out of their compartments. God knows what kind of rumors will spread in the castle after the start of term dinner. After Ino left, the three Gryffindors also entered the compartment. Harry? What prophecy? You never told me. Ron felt a little uncomfortable. He felt that his status had declined. In the past, Harry would always tell him the first thing he knew about something. Chapter 294 A Strange Dinner. The Hogwarts Express always delivered. The old steam train once again carried all the young wizards safely to their destination. As the Thestral stopped, Ino hopped off the carriage and followed the path to the castle gates. But unlike before, many young wizards had gathered outside the castle, many cursing loudly, then covering their heads with their hands as they bravely rushed towards the castle. Goyle, go see what's going on. Draco had already ordered Goyle to investigate before Ino could say anything. As for going forward to investigate, Draco didn't even consider it. A true Slytherin wouldn't blindly put himself in danger. Seeing this, Ino was also relieved. Compared to Harry's lack of training, Draco had grown a lot compared to the original story. Meanwhile, just as Goyle was about to go forward to investigate, a colorful balloon filled with water fell from the sky. With a bang, the water ball exploded at the castle gate, splashing water everywhere, soaking the gathered young wizards. Damn Peeves! The crowd roared with curses again, but far from having any effect, they only received more water balls, accompanied by absurd laughter. Ino looked up and saw a short, comical figure wearing a bell-shaped hat looming 15 feet above the castle's main entrance. In its arms, it clutched several water-filled balloons. Ha ha ha! Little brats, since you dare not come in, Peeves is here to greet you. Go on. Peeves laughed maniacally, grabbing a blue water ball in his right hand and throwing it at the crowd. The moment the ball landed, another small commotion erupted. Seeing no sign of stopping, Ino decided not to stand idly by. After all, it was no use for Peeves to block the crowd here. With this in mind, he stepped forward alone, and the young wizards on either side naturally made way. Peeves also noticed this obvious move. He first took out a water balloon and pretended to throw it, but after seeing who was coming, his large, comical eyes rolled around. Tisk. Boring. Peeves complained, and, contrary to his usual behavior, turned and walked away. This surprised not only those around him, but Ino as well. Thanks to his diligent study of history of magic, he was well aware of Peeves's characteristics. This poltergeist, born with a castle, feared no one except the Bloody Baron. Even some professors were sometimes unable to stop Peeves's mischief. Although a little surprised, he didn't bother to dwell on it. After all, the magical world was full of strange things. Outside the castle. After Peeves left, the blocked young wizards entered the Great Hall in an orderly manner. Perhaps the professors had already known about this year's event, as Ino noticed the Great Hall had been refurbished. Not only were there brighter candles, but a beautiful circle of magical lights had also been lit around the hall. At the Slytherin table, Ino found a seat nearby and settled down. However, as he sat down, a low, gloomy, and slightly hoarse voice echoed from behind him. "Peeves is afraid of you." The Bloody Baron, despite being Slytherin's resident ghost, was much more discreet than the other ghosts, rarely even appearing on his own. Most of the time, he was seen alone, burdened with the shackles of repentance, wandering the dark corridors beneath the castle. Is it strange, too, but it's not unusual for a poltergeist to be afraid of wizards, isn't it, Mr. Baron? Ino turned and saw Haggard Baron, dressed in a robe stained with silver blood. Is that normal? Baron shook his head in a puzzling tone, then vanished into the wall. After a brief delay, Ino discovered the sorting ceremony had begun. Professor McGonagall, leading a group of newly admitted young wizards, entered the Great Hall silently from the side hall, under the gaze of everyone. Seeing the new students, each one shuddering with fear and stiffness, the seniors all smiled with a sense of lingering satisfaction. History, it seemed, repeated itself year after year. The sorting ceremony was the same as always. The sorting hats off key singing began again, but by now, Ino was no longer quite as curious about the hat. The sorting hat, with its own thoughts and independent thinking, was not unique to the wizarding world. Whether it was the boy named Rick beside Nico or those 3-inch figurines, they were all capable of independent thought. But what truly intrigued him was how the sorting hat had managed to survive for millennia. Could it be that every headmaster personally extended its life? That was ridiculous. As he pondered this, Professor McGonagall had finished reading the list. Miraculously, this year's Slytherin class had broken the 40-member mark for the first time. Remember, the year Harry entered Hogwarts, there was a surge of new students, and Slytherin only had 29 new students. Looking at the adorable new students, Ino clapped softly. As Professor McGonagall put away the sorting hat and stools, Dumbledore slowly rose from the guest of honor seat, beaming at all the young wizards. "I'm delighted, very delighted. We're all together again, but there's only one thing I want to say." Dumbledore spread his arms, his deep voice echoing through the hall. He raised his wand, tapped it lightly in the air, and declared, "Eat." With those words, the long table, previously empty, was instantly piled high with all sorts of food. Finally, "You can eat." An inopportune voice called out. Ino glanced sideways, but once she realized it was Crabbe, she became accustomed to it. Perhaps the only truly glutton in Slytherin was the foolish Goyle. As for Crabbe, he always played dumb in front of others, intentionally or unintentionally. But he didn't bother to judge others' choices. After cutting a juicy piece of steak, Ino didn't put it in his mouth right away. Instead, he examined it carefully. Through the gap between his forks, he could clearly see silvery white ghosts floating in the hall. This reminded him of his experiences today. He felt something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Peeves had become obedient, and the Bloody Baron, who had always kept strangers away, had spoken. Although these were all innocuous little things, they revealed the world behind them, Hogwarts. Then he thought back to Harry's words about the Trelawney prophecy in the train compartment. For a moment, Ino wanted to ask Dumbledore what he had been doing for the past 2 weeks of summer vacation. However, seeing the old headmaster sitting at the HUD table with a smile on his face, his hands nimbly cutting the food on his plate, he gradually suppressed the urge. It was clear that Dumbledore was in good spirits. Seeing this, Ino's attention gradually shifted to the scene before him. He picked up a piece of steak and slowly put it into his mouth. Although he wasn't in a rush at the moment, he still planned to visit the headmaster's office after dinner. It's the beginning of the month. Please vote, please vote, please vote. Also, the curtain has risen on the 4th year, and Zyodi is working hard to make the story exciting. Thank you for your support. Today, Zyodi is sharing Bloody Baron. Identity: Slytherin's resident ghost. Characteristics: as a ghost, Baron appears extremely pale, pearly white with a slightly translucent hue. Baron has wide, staring black eyes and a haggard appearance. His robes are stained with silver blood, and he wears shackles as penance for killing Helena Ravenclaw. He speaks in a raspy voice. Personality: in life, Baron was described by Helena as having a bad temper. As a ghost, he frightened most people, and people didn't want him to exist, even other ghosts. Chapter 295 Triwizard Tournament. The feast marked the beginning of a new school year at Hogwarts. Everything seemed to be on track. At the Gryffindor table, Ron immediately devoured the delicious food. After a long train ride, he was already starving. In his left hand, he clutched a large chicken drumstick, while in his right, he held a spoonful, scooping into a plate of mashed potatoes with parsley and garlic leaves. Judging by the way he ate, one might have thought the Wheel Eyes were treating him poorly. Nearly headless Nico, Gryffindor's resident ghost, hovered nearby, watching Ron's munching away. He couldn't help but feel a little envious. But as a ghost, he couldn't eat human food, so he could only watch. "Hey, you're pretty lucky, I'd say. You almost had dinner tonight," nearly headless Nico said with a sour tone. Ron devoured his food, seemingly unconcerned. But Harry, standing beside him, decisively took up the conversation, curiously asking, "Oh? Tell me what happened." "There was a big commotion in the kitchen earlier. Peeves went crazy, I don't know what, and he spent the whole afternoon making trouble." Nearly headless Nico sighed heavily, but his movement seemed a bit too loud, making his neck, which was still attached to the leather, look a little unsteady. "And then?" "Peeves has to have a reason." Ron smacked his lips enjoying the conversation. Ron knew that a lot of news about the castle was learned accidentally, and it was absolutely necessary to listen to less, otherwise there would be no sufficient topics for conversation. "And then?" "The reason." Nearly headless Nico turned around in midair. Naturally, Peeves was driven away by the Bloody Baron. As for the reason, it's simply a rehash of past events. Peeves had been eager to attend the banquet. We thought he'd been quiet for decades, but he'd started up again. The kitchen was a mess. "That's terrible," Ron replied half-heartedly. There were no exciting topics, and he didn't really feel like chatting with ghosts. The start of term dinner continued with this casual chatter and bustle. About an hour later, Dumbledore stood up again. "Well, I think you've all had enough." As the headmaster finished speaking, the remaining food, various half-finished drinks, and tableware disappeared from the table in an instant, leaving the long tables of the four houses pristine once again. 2 whole hours, it's like feeding a Tibblewort hog. Draco grumbled quietly. Ino heard the complaint but said nothing. Different perspectives lead to different conclusions. What may seem like a sumptuous and delicious meal is a feast for some families, but for others, it's just everyday fare. But one thing is certain, even within Slytherin, families with house elves are rare. This might be why the dinner lasted 2 hours. At the guest of honor table, Dumbledore reiterated his usual warnings, primarily warning the freshmen not to venture into the Forbidden Forest and to prohibit the use of dangerous toys within the castle. The details were provided by Filch, the castle keeper. As he spoke, Dumbledore glanced discreetly at the Gryffindor table, focusing on the twins sitting there. George and Fred exchanged a glance, seemingly resonating, and simultaneously adopted a clear conscience. Dumbledore, beaming, shifted his gaze back to the young wizards within the castle. "Besides, I regret to inform you that Hogwarts will not be hosting the Quidditch House Cup this year." Boom. This news was like a bombshell, catching everyone off guard. Why would he? Draco, disregarding etiquette, excitedly slammed the table. Perhaps he had joined a student Quidditch team to gain recognition. But over the past 2 years, he'd gradually grown accustomed to Quidditch and even developed a love for it. Draco was immediately displeased when he heard about the cancellation. If Slytherin was acting this way, let alone the other 3 houses. If it weren't for Dumbledore's long-standing prestige, the young wizards might have revolted right then and there. Even though most of the young wizards maintained a basic level of sanity, the protests in the Great Hall nearly ripped the ceiling apart. Many looked anxiously at Dumbledore, awaiting an explanation. Faced with this, Dumbledore raised his hands and feinted them downwards, and the clamor instantly died down. Quidditch is being suspended because of a major event this year, which will begin in October and continue throughout the school year. Therefore, we have to make some adjustments. But I'm sure you'll all enjoy it greatly. I'm honored to announce that this year's Hogwarts. Dumbledore's voice echoed throughout the Great Hall, but amidst all the anticipation, a series of rapid crashes interrupted his words. This, too, caught the attention of the young wizards in the auditorium. Unlike the others, who were curious, Ino was slightly surprised. Unlike the original story, where Lupin was banished, the werewolf professor was still sitting at the staff table. With a bang, the auditorium door swung open before everyone's gaze. An elderly wizard stood there, leaning on a specially crafted cane. As if to demonstrate its usefulness, the wizard slammed it into the ground, making a dull thud before limping into the auditorium. The bright candlelight revealed the intruder, long, wispy gray hair, a face covered in scars. But what caught everyone's attention most were his eyes, one large and one small, each a bit eerie and uncanny. One normal brown eye stared forward, while the other, a strange blue one, darted around, scanning the surroundings. Mad Eye. How could it be him? A few senior students murmured in the Great Hall. Moody, however, ignored the discussions. As England's top Auror, he was well aware of his reputation and accustomed to being gossiped about. But the more he was talked about, the more arrogant Moody became, unscrupulously gazing at the room with his magical eye. But soon, Moody was surprised to discover that someone had dared to look him in the eye. At the same time, when Ino saw that the magical eye had stopped moving, he smiled politely and naturally averted his gaze. After a brief exchange of glances, he felt that this Moody before him must be the real one. Although there was no solid proof, a wizard's intuition could sometimes be a good indicator. Now that he was certain, Ino decided not to confront him provocatively. While the old Auror was powerful, he had his limits. Now, he was curious about Dumbledore's plans. Although Hogwarts is very large, the teaching staff positions are individually assigned. With no vacant positions, where should the headmaster assign Moody? Chapter 296 Moody's Arrangement. Hogwarts Great Hall. As Ino averted his gaze, Moody did the same. The elderly wizard, leaning on a cane, limped toward the staff. Honestly, despite the cane, Moody's walking speed was no less than a normal person's, even faintly agile. Under everyone's gaze, Dumbledore reached out and gently embraced Moody. After a brief exchange, the headmaster once again turned his gaze to the young wizard in the audience. For some reason, I must interrupt. I would now have the honor of introducing a gentleman to you all. Dumbledore paused briefly, but noticing Moody showed no inclination to stand and greet him, he continued, due to the heavy workload of our Care of Magical Creatures professor, Rubius Hagrid, the 12 Hogwarts trustees have unanimously agreed to appoint a new gamekeeper. Yes. From this year onwards, Mr. Aladdus Moody will serve as gamekeeper at Hogwarts. After Dumbledore's introduction, only a few token applause broke out from the audience. After all, neither the young Muggle-born wizards nor those familiar with Moody's experience particularly liked the new gamekeeper. The former, perhaps due to a certain superficiality, and Moody's unpolite behavior from the moment he entered the room. The latter, on the other hand, were simply attracted by the rumors that Moody was paranoid, insane, and neurotic, more like a dark wizard than a dark wizard. As if to confirm this, Moody sat at the staff table, pulled out his wand, and held it firmly in his hand. He then produced several different styles of snipping mirrors and arranged them in different positions, like a game of wizard chess. This scene stunned everyone present. Even Dumbledore shook his head with a wry smile. Alright, let's get back to the point. The Quidditch House Cup will not be held this academic year. Instead, it will be replaced by another renowned tournament that has been suspended for over a century. Yes, I am deeply honored to announce that the Triwizard Tournament, which has been suspended for over 100 years, will be held this year. At Hogwarts. The Goblet of Fire will be ignited. It will represent the eternal honor of the 3 schools of wizardry in Europe. Dumbledore's tone wasn't deliberately sentimental, but even this simple remark excited all the young wizards. Of course, those who knew about the Triwizard Tournament were thrilled. As for those who didn't, well, the atmosphere was already being set, so they could just join in the fun. Excellent. Eternal glory. At the Gryffindor table, Ron nodded in praise. Ron, what is the Triwizard Tournament? Harry poked Ron's arm in confusion. Huh? Yes. The Triwizard Tournament is indeed great. Ron continued to be happy. Ron. Harry was about to repeat his doubts when he was interrupted by another voice beside him. Don't ask him. Can't you see the guilty conscience hidden under his serious face? Across the table, Hermione mercilessly pierced Ron's last bit of dignity. You. Ron was a little angry, But he thought that if he got into an argument, he might be asked what the Triwizard Tournament was. After thinking for a moment, Ron pretended not to hear and looked away. Seeing Ron's guilty look, Hermione snorted and then began to share knowledge about the Triwizard Tournament and the Goblet of Fire. Since the 13th century AD, Hermione spoke rapidly. Harry and the other young Gryffindor wizards around them now had a general understanding of what the Triwizard Tournament was. Simply put, 3 European schools each select a champion to represent their school in a series of competitions and trials. The winner not only receives a substantial financial reward, but also has their name permanently inscribed in the Goblet of Fire. The combination of money, fame, a champion, and an exciting adventure, this combination of conditions was a deadly temptation for the teenagers present. At that moment, not only Harry, but also Ron and the other young wizards around them, felt a deep yearning. As Hermione diligently explained the Triwizard Tournament, the atmosphere at the Slytherin table, on the other side, was harmonious. Aside from the new students, all the wizards from 2nd to 7th years in Serpentine House turned their gazes in one direction. "I know. This is practically tailor-made for you," Draco said proudly. Whether it was his expression or his demeanor, it was clear he was determined to win this honor. Ino gave a non-committal smile. Compared to the seemingly playful Triwizard Tournament, he was more curious about Dumbledore's plans for the upcoming events. Therefore, in response to Draco's suggestion, Ino made an excuse, "Perhaps, but I might also need to leave school for a while in October." "Leave school?" Draco's voice suddenly rose, drawing the attention of many Slytherins nearby. "Yes. Leave school," Ino confirmed with a slight nod. "The Order of Merlin sent me a receipt. There are some things I must attend." Ino didn't elaborate, but Draco had already guessed the reason. In fact, it wasn't just Draco, many others, including Pansy and Daphne, had guessed it as well. The Order of Merlin's medal, symbolizing the highest honor in the wizarding world, was, in some ways, more powerful than the Goblet of Fire. "That's a shame. But congratulations." Draco's tone was conflicted. At first, it sounded listless, but there was also a hint of joy. "You can participate. If you want. Maybe you can even leave your name behind, Malfoy," Ino teased softly. "Forget it." Draco shrugged nonchalantly, explaining, "I wouldn't put myself in danger for the sake of honor." Thanks to his passive tutoring in history of magic, Draco knew the reason for the Triwizard Tournament's cancellation. Whatever. Ino was equally unfazed by Draco's choice. Without any external interference, this honor would always belong to Hogwarts. This wasn't arrogance, but rather Ino's experience and observations in the Transfiguration Club, as well as his assessment of Cedric's abilities. Although only in 6th year, Cedric already possessed abilities that surpassed those of an average adult wizard. Whether it was his mastery of transfiguration magic or his brilliant mind, in terms of overall strength, Cedric's title of Hogwarts Knight was highly deserved. While Ino pondered, Draco looked around boredly. It seemed as if more and more people were learning about the Triwizard Tournament, and the atmosphere in the Great Hall was growing increasingly heated. After all, this was unlike the previous 5-yearly event. After over 100 years of hiatus, this was the first Goblet of Fire winner. Such an honor, probably, few could refuse. Chapter 297 The Hidden Room in the Principal's Office. Time always slipped by quietly. After Dumbledore declared the dinner over, all the young wizards from the 4 houses, led by their prefects, returned to their dormitories in an orderly manner. Of course, this included a crucial moment, a chorus of the school song. As they exited the Great Hall, while everyone was discussing the Triwizard Tournament, Ino turned and headed for the stairs. However, the 6 Slytherin prefects, male and female, from the 5th, 6th, and 7th years, uniformly chose to ignore this inappropriate moment. Privilege was on full display at this moment. But the next scene was quite interesting. Gryffindor, red, and Ravenclaw, blue, walked side by side on the moving staircase. The 2 houses were clearly divided, each occupying half, but behind the red and blue, a green hovered in the distance. At the same time, Hermione and Cho began their spacewalk. It was essentially a dance of feet moving, while in reality, they were constantly moving backwards. "Ino. Why are you here?" 2 clear voices rang out simultaneously, then quickly stopped. Hermione turned in surprise, but when she saw it was Cho, she relaxed. The 4 of them were in the Transfiguration Club together, and Hermione knew Cho well enough. Since she had a boyfriend, she didn't mind much. Compared to Hermione's indifference, Chu seemed a little embarrassed, as if she were secretly giving milk tea to a friend, but this subtle change was fleeting. I'm on my way to see Professor Dumbledore. Seeing the two girls, Ino didn't hide her itinerary. Okay. Don't forget about Wednesday's club. I have to go back first. Chu was the first to react. In the brief delay, she noticed that several Ravenclaws were turning their heads. She said this hastily and followed the Ravenclaw group, as there were too many people there. You're looking for Professor Dumbledore? About the Triwizard Tournament. Unlike Chu, who shied away from gossip, Hermione wore a nonchalant expression, letting those who liked to gossip go as they pleased. It's not the Triwizard Tournament, it's mainly because I have something I want to discuss with Professor Dumbledore. Ino and Hermione walked side by side, chatting as they ascended the sliding staircase. It looked like a chat, but more so, Hermione was sharing, while Ino listened and responded. Perhaps, no matter how long a journey, it has its end. The 8th floor of the castle. Ino's destination was the headmaster's office, while Hermione followed a Gryffindor group down the corridor. A few minutes later, Ino once again arrived at a familiar corridor. He gazed at the stone beast not far away. This time, before he even approached, the gatekeeper turned and made way. To be honest, the first time the stone beast opened the door on its own initiative, 2 years ago, he had been surprised, but later it became commonplace. During this time, Ino had repeatedly criticized the headmaster's office security system, saying it was like having a husky guarding the door. Who knows what the original story was all about? Umbridge, recognized as the headmaster by the Ministry of Magic and the 12 trustees, simply couldn't get through this door. Thinking of this, Ino reached out and patted the stone beast on the head as he passed it. A gatekeeper whose effectiveness sometimes failed. Passing the stone beast and passing through a connecting corridor, Ino arrived at the headmaster's office once again. After glancing around, he had to admit that his arrival was somewhat unfortunate. Dumbledore didn't seem to have returned to his office directly after the dinner. While somewhat surprising, this outcome was also understandable. After all, with Dumbledore being the new gamekeeper, it was understandable that he would be late. Sitting on the sofa, Ino quietly waited. It seemed like night had truly arrived. Even the usually talkative Headmaster Black had begun snoring, giving the office a quietude. Likewise, amid the snoring of past headmasters, Ino slowly closed his eyes. In stark contrast to the quiet of the headmaster's office, on the other side of the castle on the 8th floor, in the Gryffindor common room, the atmosphere was truly lively. I've decided. I'm going to compete. Ron declared righteously. But beside him, aside from Harry's habitual nod, no one paid him any attention. I just don't know how they're going to choose the champion. Is it just a matter of luck? But I think it would be better to have a wizard's chess tournament to choose the champion. Ron stroked his chin and expressed his opinion seriously. Then I'd prefer a Quidditch game. Harry immediately expressed his disagreement. Come on, little Ronnie. Your whimsical ideas are making me laugh. George emerged from the crowd, carrying a large stack of butterbeer, looking as if he were selling merchandise. Laugh? What's there to laugh about? Ron said with a hint of dissatisfaction, but he also knew George had a point. Choosing a champion through wizard's chess was probably a completely outlandish idea. Ron quickly changed the unfavorable topic. I'm just curious, you and Fred are so rich, why are you still selling these things? Ron remembered the scene after the Quidditch World Cup, when Ginny opened her purse and it was filled with gold galleons, at least dozens at a glance. Does selling things have to make money? Fred appeared behind Ron. We're just having fun, and we didn't add a single note to these things. Oh, and Harry, this is for you. Fred pulled a can of butterbeer from his pocket and handed it to Harry. Where's mine? I'm your brother. After confirming that there was no share for him, Ron's eyes widened in disbelief. Oh, brother. George sympathetically took out a can and handed it to Ron. Brother. 3 sickles. With just one sentence, Ron's smile froze on his face. Time passed by minute. In the headmaster's office, Ino slowly opened his eyes and looked up at the alarm clock on the wall. It was 10:30 p.m. This made him not want to wait any longer. Who knew if Dumbledore would be back tonight? Crimson Blush. A soft call echoed, and a beautiful orange figure suddenly appeared in the office. Ino stood up and was about to ask Phoenix to take him back to his dorm when an oval arch suddenly appeared on the office wall. Although curious, he turned his head, considering the office owner was away, and pretended not to see it. However, just as Ino picked up Crispin, an old voice echoed from the room, "I thought you'd be curious, but you left so abruptly. It's the beginning of the month, and Zyodi is begging for votes, votes, votes. Everyone, please vote. Zyodi's sharing today, demigods. British Ministry of Magic Classification, XXXX. Origin and distribution, demigods is generally found in the Far East. Appearance, the invisible beast resembles an elegant ape, with large black eyes often hidden behind long fur, revealing a hint of sadness. Its entire body is covered in long, fine, silvery fur that shimmers like silk. Habits, the invisible beast is a gentle, quiet, herbivorous magical creature. Powers and uses, because the invisible beast can become invisible when threatened and has a certain ability to predict the future in the short term, it is difficult for ordinary people to see it. Only wizards who are skilled in capturing it can see it. The invisible beast's fur is highly valued because its hair can be used to weave invisibility cloaks. However, over time, invisibility cloaks made of invisible beast hair will eventually lose their effectiveness and become no longer transparent. Related knowledge, because of its invisibility, the invisible beast represents the number 0 in the runic alphabet. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelists. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298, Legendary Things, Names that Suddenly Appear. Sometimes, one has to admit, Dumbledore is always unexpected. However, this also requires some differentiation. Not everyone is called Harry. In fact, when he first entered the office, Ino probably didn't think much of it. But when all the headmaster's portraits maintained a unified rhythm, snoring softly, everything seemed to have been resolved. Originally, he might have waited a little longer, but with a mysterious room appearing, the urge to leave was unwavering. When it came to sting operations, no one in the castle could outsmart the elderly headmaster. Meanwhile, Ino paused at the sound of a voice. "Professor. While I'm curious, I know my limits. This is your office, and I'm not reckless." He stopped abruptly mid-sentence, realizing that discriminating based on house wasn't a good idea. "I didn't expect that," Dumbledore said, his tone awash with the frustration of a failed prank. "But now that I'm here, aren't you curious?" Hearing this, Ino raised a hand and rubbed his brow. His recent doze left him feeling groggy and half asleep. But one thing was certain, he had to be curious tonight, and Dumbledore's hints couldn't be too obvious. "Okay, I'm curious," Ino said with a calmest expression, yet with the most emotional words imbued with emotion. "That's right. Follow me if you're curious." Dumbledore chuckled, his smile even bright and radiant. Following Dumbledore into the hidden magic door, Ino discovered a hidden world. It wasn't the secret room he'd imagined, but a rather ordinary built-in office. But what was interesting was the color palette. The walls and ceiling were a warm orange-red, creating a bright and welcoming atmosphere. But amidst this bright orange-red, there were interwoven hues of dark green, which at first glance seemed a bit strange, but thankfully, the dark green accents were subtle. The room wasn't very large, seemingly no more than 20 square meters, but every detail exuded the atmosphere of Western classical antiquity. In the center stood an intricately carved pearlwood table, 10 feet long and 3 feet wide, easily enough for a troll to lie down. However, even with such a single bed-like table, it was sparsely furnished. A silver candlestick burned not ordinary flames but Gulliver's fire, known as the Eternal Flame. While somewhat unfamiliar with Gulliver's fire, Ino knew some basic information about it. It was a profound magic, and an item that had appeared in the original story. Once, at Dumbledore's behest, Hagrid brought a torchlight with Gulliver's fire to visit the giants, and the giant leader was delighted with the gift. Despite the magical power of the Gulliver's fire, Ino paid little attention, instead focusing on 2 other items on the table. An ancient, 2-foot-wide, unfolded scroll and a quill pen nestled in a dried-out inkwell. The scroll was unfolded, and due to the distance and angle, Ino couldn't see its contents, but the exterior was clearly visible. The core was crafted from obsidian, and 4 distinct gemstones, red, yellow, blue, and green, were inlaid at each end. Each gem emanated a soft, mysterious glow, blazing, deep, profound, and calm, as if each color represented a piece of knowledge or emotion. When these four emotions intertwined, though there was no tangible image, a vivid scene emerged in the mind's eye. It was as if one had traveled through time and space to over 1,000 years ago. Four exceptional wizards had gathered here, in this small room, sharing their philosophies and discussing topics of interest. Ino quietly examined the two objects on the table. If he couldn't guess what they were, he would be playing dumb. The Foundations of Hogwarts, the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance. After a moment, he averted his gaze and surveyed the rest of the room. A double-hung window less than 2 feet high, 3 floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and a vintage high-backed chair. I'm surprised. Ino sighed softly, looking at Dumbledore and asking carefully, "This isn't a place I'm supposed to be in, so are you sure you're thinking clearly right now?" "Ha ha ha. I'm sure." Dumbledore seemed to have been waiting for this moment, his laughter tinged with a hint of triumph and a hint of mischievous success. "Even though they always say I'm an old lunatic and out of tune, most of the time, my mind is still quite clear, like right now." After the laughter subsided, Dumbledore's expression gradually grew serious. "I know, you've been able to come here since 2 years ago. Not just here, but anywhere in the castle. And this power wasn't granted by me, but by Hogwarts." As he spoke, Dumbledore had already moved behind the table and waved with a clear intention. Seeing this, Ino didn't hesitate and followed suit. He was equally curious about the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance. These two items were truly the foundation of Hogwarts, its most crucial elements. Hogwarts could exist without a castle, a sorting hat, or even other unimportant items, but it couldn't be without the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance. After all, a wizarding school's most important priority was its student population. These two items could effectively monitor the British Isles. If a child's magical power was detected, the Pen of Acceptance would fly, recording the child's name in the Book of Admission. In short, with these two items, even a carriage could call itself Hogwarts. This was no exaggeration. Similarly, without the Book of Admission and the Pen of Acceptance, a castle was just a castle. At Dumbledore's signal, Ino finally read the contents of the Book of Admission. Surprisingly, the 2-foot-long scroll contained not a densely packed list of names, but instead a flowing nebula composed of 4 colors, red, yellow, blue, and green. However, the Book of Admission seemed to possess consciousness. Upon noticing someone reading it, the flowing nebula vanished, replaced by a long list. Written in red, yellow, blue, and green ink: Rowena Ravenclaw, Godric Gryffindor, Philida Spur, Delis Devant, Phineas Black, Armando Dippet, Albus Dumbledore. Ino read the list from top to bottom. As he reached Dumbledore's name, written in red ink, another green name suddenly appeared in the blank space at the back of the scroll: Ino Swinburne. Chapter 299. Gradually, everything is connected. Hogwarts, the headmaster's office. On the sofa, Ino was still trying to digest what he had seen in the Chamber of Secrets. It was so sudden that his name was recorded in the Book of Admission, and was even listed behind Dumbledore. Considering the names of the dozen or so well-known wizards, it was obvious what the list represented. It stands to reason that in the original story, the headmaster of Hogwarts had changed frequently in the last few years. From the ridiculous pink-toed Umbridge, to Snape later, and finally to Professor McGonagall, who deserved the title. But what happened today really surprised him. Thinking of this, Ino looked at Dumbledore across from him again. "Professor, I'm only a 4th year. Don't you think this decision is too hasty?" "Haste?" Dumbledore pondered. "It seems you've misunderstood something. As I said, it's Hogwarts that has granted you this authority, from the beginning. Look at how many portraits are here, and how many headmasters are recorded in the Hogwarts history." Dumbledore gestured towards the portraits on the wall, a gesture that drew disapproving eye rolls from past headmasters, and even a curse from the hot-tempered Phineas Black. Perhaps Ino would have watched this scene with great interest in the past, but now. He pondered Dumbledore's words and recalled Hogwarts history. Since its founding in 990 AD, the history records a total of 17 headmasters. But the numbers on the list and in the portraits on the wall clearly didn't match. After a while, Ino gradually understood. Headmasters, perhaps, came into being in 2 categories. One is chosen independently and approved by Hogwarts, while the other is nominated by wizards, the Ministry of Magic, or the school's Board of Trustees when no suitable candidate is available. After expressing his hypothesis, Ino turned his gaze back to Dumbledore. "That's right. Dumbledore nodded decisively. As I have told you before, no one can fully understand the castle. Not only because it hides countless secrets, but also because it possesses a mind of its own. Dumbledore paused for a moment, then spread his hands with a hint of melancholy. His tone was slightly heavy as he spoke, and this is the key. Just as no one can truly understand a person, even most of the time, they themselves don't understand themselves. After Dumbledore finished speaking, Ino didn't immediately respond. Instead, he went over his experiences of the past few years in his mind. Perhaps because he had just visited Nico, he couldn't help but connect magic and alchemy. If he truly viewed the entire castle as a living entity, a powerful product of alchemy, everything seemed to make sense. Whether it was the ever-present sorting hat, the room of requirement behind the tapestry, or even the second-year basilisk. Especially the basilisk. Ino now finally understood the chain of happenstance in the original story, the extra puddle of water, the ghost blocking his way. If he had previously suspected Dumbledore, now he had no hesitation, attributing everything to the castle's will. Even so, suspecting Dumbledore was a bit far-fetched. Magic influences personality, and as a member of the Dumbledore family favored by the Great White Wizard, Fawkes, the headmaster probably wouldn't allow a 5x basilisk to run rampant in the castle just for the sake of so-called planning. Similarly, Ino also thought of another reason why Dumbledore never knew where the basilisk was hiding. Salazar Slytherin had placed the basilisk himself, surely taking into account the authority of subsequent headmasters. If any headmaster could discover it, Slytherin's Chamber of Secrets would be a joke, meaningless. Gradually, everything began to connect. There was even a moment when Ino thought of the Gaunt family notes. Was it Lena who found it in the restricted section of the library, or was it the castle itself that wanted her to find it? For a long time. Okay. I think I understand everything. Ino leaned back on the sofa, slowly stretched out his finger, and tentatively tapped the empty coffee table. It was a magical scene. A cup of freshly squeezed herbal juice suddenly appeared on the coffee table. Don't look at it as just a drink, but this involves the power of the principle. You know, in the 3 years at Hogwarts, Ino has seen countless professors go to the auditorium for dinner, including several deans, and even Professor McGonagall, the vice principal. But the only thing he didn't see was Dumbledore. At first, he always thought it was the time difference, but now it seems, the principal is always enjoying his special meal. As if sensing Ino's thoughts, Dumbledore spoke naturally. I sometimes fill my stomach with sweets. Honeydukes is as delicious as ever. Would you like some? Though he was asking, Dumbledore had already stood up and walked towards the candy cabinet. 2 plates laden with sweets were brought to the coffee table. One was pure white butter toffee, the other a wriggling pile of cockroaches. Seeing the familiar candies, Ino couldn't help but recall his first year in the astronomy tower. That was his first time alone with Dumbledore, and he, too, had greedily eaten a few more pieces of candy. It seemed that from then on, Dumbledore always served a whole plate of butter toffee as a treat. Thank you for your generosity. Ino smiled and took a piece of candy. As Dumbledore had said, the taste hadn't changed, still as rich and creamy as ever. In response, Dumbledore smiled silently. Time was as silent as water. After finishing the last piece of candy, Ino reached up and wiped the remaining sugar residue from the corner of her mouth. Professor, there's something I want to tell you. On the train at the beginning of term this year, Harry told me something. Before the holidays, Trelawney made a prophecy for him. It said Harry would kill you. After saying this, Ino looked up to see Dumbledore's reaction. However, faced with this prophecy, Dumbledore wasn't the least bit flustered. He even smiled amusement, as if he had witnessed something amusing. But soon, the smile faded, replaced by sympathy and compassion. Sybil is always like this. Every word a fortune teller says has a price. But this time, I didn't expect it. Being killed by Harry. That seems quite interesting. It's not interesting at all. Ino interrupted Dumbledore. If you were killed by Harry, who would deal with Voldemort? Although Hogwarts recognizes me, I don't have the ability to take care of so many people. Ino deliberately emphasized the meaning of Harry, but the meaning was self-evident. If it really came to this, Harry would probably not be able to escape the fate of perishing together with Voldemort. After all, his opponent was Voldemort, and if he hesitated, he would only end up like Dumbledore in the prophecy. Chapter 300, The Fruit of Dumbledore's Summer Vacation, All the Horcruxes. Sometimes, the mood in a conversation shifts in a split second. Ino noticed that after he finished speaking, Dumbledore gradually fell into deep thought. Faced with this reverie, he didn't intend to interrupt it. After a long pause, Dumbledore stood up again and walked towards the candy cabinet, the only cabinet in the headmaster's office. Opening it, two objects slowly floated in midair. One was a foot long, two-handled goblet, golden in color, its body intricately carved with a lifelike honey badger. The other, much smaller, was a ring, seemingly crudely crafted. Interestingly, this ring was also golden, only inlaid with a gemstone resembling obsidian. Even without looking at the appearance, a mere touch revealed the deep malevolence woven into both objects. "Your wisdom is admirable," Ino exclaimed. Unlike him, who knew the entire story, Dumbledore, with only the limited information he knew, was able to decipher each of Voldemort's backup plans. This made him want to tell Tom, "Your professor is always your professor." Meanwhile, Dumbledore waved his hand dismissively at the praise. "That's not hard to guess, if you know him. Excellent magical talent, handsome looks, high emotional intelligence and social skills, loved by everyone." Dumbledore's tone was filled with a hint of regret, but then he shifted to a teasing tone. "Honestly, when you first started, you and Tom really looked alike. Is that why you kept creating chance encounters?" Ino said half-jokingly. "Ha ha ha, yes. I was always on purpose to find you," Dumbledore admitted openly. "But it wasn't until your second year, when your name appeared in the admission book, that I realized the fundamental difference between you and Tom." This time, Ino didn't interrupt Dumbledore's narration. Instead, he sat up straight and listened, knowing that the main event was about to begin. As expected, after sighing, Dumbledore changed the subject. Because Tom has an innate arrogance, he wouldn't choose mundane objects for his Horcruxes, except for the notebook he kept during his school days. And after seeing Slytherin's pendant, I formed a tentative hypothesis. Dumbledore stopped mid-sentence as the discoverer, Ino, vanished from the scene. A brief moment later, when Ino reappeared, she held an ornate tiara inlaid with countless gems. "Don't overthink it. I'm not embezzling it. I'm simply borrowing it for a while. It will always belong to Hogwarts," Ino explained, placing the tiara on the coffee table in front of her. "I trust you. That will never change, just as Hogwarts trusts you." Dumbledore waved his hand dismissively, his gaze returning to the chalice and ring beside him. "I'm surprised Tom would be so crazy as to create 6 Horcruxes. The diary, the pendant, the tiara, the chalice, the ring, Harry." These thoughts flashed through Dumbledore's mind. Perhaps more than 6, since he might not even know of Harry's existence. After a moment's deliberation, Ino decided to tell the original story. According to the original storyline, the creation of the final Horcrux took place this year, but with everything changing, it was unclear whether Voldemort would still choose Nagini as the carrier of the Horcrux. Therefore, even if he chose to tell the original story, he refrained from making the clever move of mentioning Nagini the Viper. After all, in such matters, a single miscalculation could easily lead to a different outcome. More than 6, Harry. Dumbledore frowned slightly. Seeing the headmaster's distress, Ino was helpless. Unlike the previous Horcruxes, which had clear traces, the final one was the most difficult to predict. Time slipped by as he pondered. After a while, Dumbledore spoke slowly. "Ino, perhaps your guess is correct. It seems Sybil's prophecy will be postponed for a considerable period this time. Are you really planning to sacrifice yourself to save Harry?" Ino looked surprised, but he soon understood the reason. Unlike the original story, where Harry was forced into a situation, Dumbledore's self-sacrifice, given the choice, might be the true scenario. Faced with Ino's surprise, Dumbledore remained silent, offering only a faint smile, neither denying nor approving. Late at night, Ino left the headmaster's office. Walking alone in the silent corridors, he heard no sound save for the dormant portraits and the creaking of the staircases. The castle, too, sank into deep sleep with the night. In this silence, he pondered his final conversation with Dumbledore. He respected the subsequent arrangements in his own choices. After all, no one is immortal, even Nicole and Perenelle cannot achieve true immortality. However, if possible, Ino wanted Dumbledore to live a peaceful old age. A half-century of repentance for the mistakes of his youth, perhaps that was enough. Time flows like water, slipping away silently without notice. After the opening dinner, Hogwarts erupted in a state of excitement. The Triwizard Tournament had become a perpetual topic of conversation. Unlike previous hot topics, discussions could be heard everywhere, whether in the common room, corridors, or the Great Hall. Similarly, a new round of renovations began within the castle. The dusty portraits, hidden within the castle for centuries, were taken down and thoroughly cleaned before being replaced. The most noticeable changes during this extensive cleaning were to the armor in the corridors and the Great Hall, which served as the reception area. Every piece of armor along the corridor had been polished to shine so bright it could even be used as a mirror. The Great Hall was even more radiant, with a massive silk banner and the 4 house flags, magically enchanted, clearly fluttering overhead. Of course, many other changes were in the works, but with the posting of a notice, no one paid much attention to the castle's transformation. It was the 3rd week of school. Under Professor McGonagall's watchful eye, Filch posted a notice in the Great Hall announcing the arrival of Oaksburtons and Durmstrang at Hogwarts this weekend. This announcement served as a catalyst, igniting the already lively atmosphere in the castle to a climax. However, there are always exceptions. Some people care about something, while others don't. Take Ino, for example. Compared to the Triwizard Tournament, his thoughts were now completely focused on the Valley of Sanctuary. The magic beans that sprouted last year, a full year later, have borne fruit, or rather, gifts, by the time of the Harvest Festival at the end of September. It's the beginning of the month, and I'm begging for votes, votes, votes. Everyone, please vote. Today's post, Poltergeist. A poltergeist, also known as a poltergeist, is a legendary noisy ghost that originates in European mythology. Appearance: poltergeists typically lack a specific form. Habits: poltergeists often appear in specific locations, particularly those with large concentrations of teenagers. They may be spawned by the construction of certain buildings, or they may quietly take up residence at a specific time. Poltergeists may also haunt Muggle dwellings. Powers and uses: poltergeists can fly and enjoy playing pranks, loosening chandeliers, writing curse words on blackboards, and throwing things around. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.